Within these holy shadows, we hear them in our dreams. We are guided by our great father's call, and we will. This world will burn. The heavens will deliver our reward. Welcome to the Objective Secure Podcast. My name's Mike.
Hey, I'm Emma.
This is episode 39, Trial and Error. We're going to be recording this in a slightly more interesting and potentially dangerous way, for at least continuity's purposes, because this episode is going to be half recorded before an event and half recorded after an event.
Yes,
so,
and we're going straight off the back of
episode 38.
Like, we've literally just hit the end record button for episode 38, and we're jumping straight into episode 39.
Yep, so we're going to be talking more Gene Stealer cults, and this time it's actually focusing on an army list that I'm taking to an event here in Western Australia, Skulls 40k.
Which is run by Outpost 6030.
Yep, their first event, 40k event they ran was all the way back in 2002, and they've run at least one every year since then, although most recently in the last few years we've been seeing one at the start of the year and another one towards the end of the year from Outpost, where they've kind of, rather than the 2-day format they used to run through the early and mid-2000s, we're now down to single-day events, but they do it twice a year. So, my chosen decision at this point in time is to run Gene Stealer cults. And
well, okay, so this is where continuity may be an issue.
It depends on how much I get painted.
Exactly. We're 2 weeks out from the event, less than 2 weeks out from the event, and some of it's not even assembled yet.
No, it's all assembled.
It's not assembled. When the wheels aren't on, they're not assembled.
It's called painting in pieces.
You can't call it assembled if you're painting
in
pieces.
But I can't glue it on until I've finished painting the hull, because I'm going to use the airbrush.
I can't tease you about it not being assembled.
I'm actually hoping with the... I've been painting a Millennium Falcon, or rather I've been showing my son how to paint his Millennium Falcon miniature.
That's our son. He's not... Well, actually, no. You can have him. It's hard work. He's your son. You're right.
I've been teaching him how to airbrush, and so the colours he's picked for the Millennium Falcon are all in greys and whites, which is great because all my trucks and vehicles are in greys and whites. So that should make it super easy to actually transfer that knowledge and learning from his Millennium Falcon straight over onto the trucks and the Sentinels and the Ridge Runners. And get
Are you suggesting you're going to get our son to paint them for you?
No.
I was going to say, I don't think that's a good idea.
But I'll get those colours down relatively quickly because now I've seen which paint sequences and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then it's a coat of gloss varnish and panel lining. And I've got the
I hate panel lining.
The Tamiya panel lining paint, which will be nice and quick. And then all I've got to do is matte varnish it, and then paint in some of the metal that's on the railings and stuff on the vehicles. And at that point, I could then glue the wheels on, put the guns on, and it would be tabletop standard.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be finished, but that's kind of what I'm aiming for at this point, is to make an army that meets the tabletop standards. And once I've actually got the hull done, then gluing those wheels on isn't an issue, and the guns themselves come off. Like one of them's a turret that actually comes off, and the other is fixed, but it's going onto something I'm already painting metal. So I've got a plan for the vehicles. The infantry, I've also, Games Workshop did a video on how to paint them super quick. I've had a quick look at that this morning, which basically involves painting them grey, which is what I've done, blocking in the 2 other base colours, the black and, in my case, the high-vis orange.
Have you got the high-vis orange?
I have several different oranges. I might even try and get a iridescent one from Vallejo to get past this point. But in the short term, block in the colours, wash the whole thing in Agrax Earthshade, paint the metal in, paint the skin in, and they're done. There's a dry brush in there as well, but you dry brush the whole model in one go. So I've got a plan for getting them to sort of a tabletop standard, which is all I'm aiming for this. And then, it'll let me take them, try them out, and then come back to them once I've had a chance to put them on the table and figure out the unit configurations, because I haven't. And we'll talk about the army list in a second. But it's going to be an interesting way of doing an army, because normally there's a lot of practice and a lot of play test, and this is a late decision.
Plug and play.
And we're going to try it out.
Yeah.
Hence trial and error. Although you wanted to call it Terry's Chocolate Orange.
Mm-hmm.
Because what was the catchphrase for it? You
tap it, unwrap it, open it, and share.
Yeah, so episode 39's tagline will be tap it, unwrap it, tap it,
unwrap
it,
open it,
and share. So that'll be the tagline for it, which will totally not make sense until you listen to this.
And then may still not make sense.
I'll put a link to Terry's Chocolate Orange website in the show notes.
I'm sure they'll appreciate that.
Yeah, that'll be the most random link back that they'll get through their website analytics, but that's fine. If they listen to it, open to sponsorship options. So look, we rather than talking about what's been going on, because nothing's been going on since we recorded episode 38.
That's not true. I managed to turn on the air conditioning.
That is true. We're going to jump straight into the episode, and we'll do this recording in the first half, and then we'll take a break, and then the second half will be done after the event,
Skulls, yeah.
Along with the outro. So we're going to sound different. There's not much I can do about that, because we'll have different microphone levels and all sorts of stuff potentially. So if it sounds a bit odd in the second half compared to now, then that's the why. So, Skulls. It's probably worth talking about the format for Skulls beforehand.
Okay. Are we breaking now? Or
we're just going to pile drive through.
Perfect. I do love it when we have a format and then we just
follow it. It's a hard one to do. So you want to take a quick break and then we'll come back with the format. We're going to do that then.
Okay.
We'll take a quick break and we'll be back in just a second. I'm not going to say we're back, but we're back.
We are.
So we're going to talk a bit about the Skulls format, and we're going to talk about the army list that I'm taking and some of the choices behind that army list. But let's talk about the format first, so that you've got a context of why the army is the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Skulls is a one-day event.
Yep.
It's 1,500 points, 2 detachments.
Yep. And it's 4 games?
4 games, 2.25 hours each. Now, there's a 15-minute warm-up period. I'm not 100% sure whether or not that warm-up period is included in the 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Yeah, so the players pack just says...
Does the players pack have a timetable, like a schedule on there for lunch break?
So it does. That 2 hours 15... So, for example, Game 1 starts at 8:15 and Game 1 finishes at 10:30. So the 15-minute warm-up has to be included in that.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-hour game, but you've got 15 minutes to do your pre-game stuff, define the terrain and pick psychic powers and all that other sort of special stuff.
And I'm imagining that if you manage to get that done in 5 minutes, you've then got 2 hours and 10 minutes to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think most players, or most experienced players, are likely going to turn up with some idea of what relics you're taking, what psychic powers you're taking, what warlord trait you're taking. Like, you should have a vague understanding of what that's going to look like.
Now, yes, okay, so I'll get to that in a second. There are Eternal War chapter approved 2018 missions.
Yep, straight out of the book.
And you come with your warlord pre-selected.
Yeah, it's pretty common these days for your warlord to be fixed for the entire event, but the traits and the relics and stuff can be changed, game to game.
I'm not 100% sure with this one if they can be.
Well, the way this certainly implies, because it says under the army list limitations that your warlord must be clearly written on your list. Mm-hmm. And then it doesn't mention anything in terms of relics and warlords except about the Vigilus stuff, which actually then goes on to say...
picked in the 15 minutes pre-game,
they will be picked pre-game at the same time as relics and warlords.
Okay, and normally that would be part of your army writing.
Yeah, the Vigilus...
For some of them.
Yeah, the Vigilus stuff, which I've got a copy of here, which I'll look up while I'm chatting to you now. You're
in the wrong file.
I am in the wrong file. God damn it. So the Vigilus is a bit like, there's a few different stratagems. The Blood Angels have got one, Death Visions of Sanguinius is the stratagem I'm thinking of. And the Vigilus is in the same boat where you can upgrade a detachment to essentially a specialist detachment, or a formation is a really common vernacular for them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just opening the Vigilus book now. Because I'm not 100% familiar with this. Okay, so at the moment I've just picked the first one, which is the Indomitus Crusaders. Use this stratagem when choosing your army, which is obviously done at list creation because you're choosing your army. Pick a Marine detachment, and then it gains this particular keyword, and that's 1 CP. So, and the same goes for all of these Vigilus detachments. It says use this stratagem when choosing your army, which for most TOs implies it's done at list creation.
Yeah, well, that is your choice of army, isn't it?
And then you've got stuff, so in that same detachment, you've obviously got extra CP stratagems, and one of them's called Veteran Intercessors, and that's 1 CP. And that one says, use this stratagem before the battle begins. Now, at that point, your army's already been selected, so you don't have to spend the CP now, but you do have to spend it at the table, essentially. You can upgrade your intercessors to veterans by spending 1 command point.
Which would be part of that pre-game.
Yeah, exactly.
15 minutes that you've got,
So it's interesting that they've let us pick the Vigilus ones on the fly rather than not.
Yeah.
I think most of the Vigilus stuff in here, so looking specifically at the Gene Stealer Cult ones, because they're obviously the ones that I'm going to be most interested in at the moment. You've got the Anointed Throng and the Brood Surge. The Anointed Throng's primarily around Aberrants and an Abominant, and the keywords are only granted to those 2 units. I don't have an Abominant in this army, and I've only got 1 unit of Aberrants. And the main reason you take it is so that you can stack the Abominants rules. So there's no,
if you don't have them, then there's no point taking
There's no relevance there for me. The other one is the Deliverance Brood Surge, which is a really good one. It's 1 CP. Use a stratagem when picking your army. Pick a Gene Stealer Cults detachment from your army to be a Brood Surge. Acolyte, Icon Wards, Neophyte Hybrids, Acolyte Hybrids, and Goliath Trucks in the detachment gain the keyword. That's pretty much my entire army.
Wow, I wonder which one you'll be using.
That's very helpful for me.
Yeah. And
then it goes on to say, if, for the Warlord trait, if a Deliverance Brood Surge character is your Warlord, you can give them this following specific trait, which is basically reroll advance and charge rolls for friendly units within 6.
Oops.
So it's a pretty decent one to have, and because my intent was to make my Warlord the Icon Ward, because he's the only character that actually gains that keyword, he has to be the Warlord if I want to use that trait. So that's instantly part of the strategy that you have to employ. The problem is that the Icon Ward is not the toughest character in the world. He's 53 points, so he's a support character, and he wants to be close to the enemy.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really bode well for his longevity, so you tend to give up Slay the Warlord with him. But with the reroll advance rolls and charge rolls for friendly units within 6 is another aura that he would get. And you stack that with the Relic Banner, which is the +1 strength banner, and then he's already giving out the reroll morale and the Feel No Pain auras. That gives him 4 auras on 1 model, which is really good. He also has an option for a new relic, which is okay, which is add 1 to the leadership characteristic of friendly units within 6, which is another aura that he would gain instead of the strength buff. And in addition, once per battle, you can pick a friendly infantry model within 3, and that model gets +2 attacks and +2 strength. It's probably not really relevant for me, though, because I don't have a single sort of super character that would utilize it. So I'll probably end up taking the banner rather than the vial of Grandsires blood. The 2 stratagems are really good as well. So you've got one that you basically get +1 to wound, which is really beneficial, particularly for things like... it only works on Brood Surge units, so it's going to be best for me for the Acolytes. And the other one's called Reckless Maneuver, which I really love because it involves the trucks basically doing these big drift maneuvers and deploying units after they've drifted. So
very nice. I can imagine that would really appeal to your...
Yep. So... I can definitely see me using that one at some point. But it's interesting that I actually get the choice at the start of the game as to whether I want to use this or not, rather than having to instantly cost myself 1 command point before the game even starts.
Yeah, so I guess you get to have a look at that, choose whether or not you want to spend that command point depending on what the mission is, depending on what you're facing, and you've got the option available. And if you had, I guess, if you had a more diverse army, you'd have the choice between the two that you could then pick depending on what
absolutely.
you're facing.
There's also another one that's worth mentioning for Vigilus, which is a 1 CP stratagem called Field Commander. Use this stratagem before the battle if you've used a specialist attachment. Choose one character, and that model that has gained the keyword that's required, which in this case would obviously be the Icon Ward, and he gets to pick a Warlord trait. So it's actually possible for me to pick another character to be the Warlord for the army, and then spend 2 CP at the start of the game, 1 to make them a Brood Surgeon, 1 to give the Icon Ward his aura anyway.
Yeah.
So it's 2 CP at the start of the game, and I've only got 9 in this army, which is a bit light. Yeah. But it's definitely an option if you feel like you desperately need that Warlord trait. I should also note out that you can only give the character the Warlord trait from the detachment. So you can't use it to then gain another generic Warlord trait or anything else.
Yeah.
So, it's the Vigilus stuff. Having that choice at and flexibility without having to decide at list building is really, really beneficial as far as I can see. Which
who's the dude that sits at the back making CP?
Oh, the Nexus.
Yeah. I thought that, and I was like, why haven't I written a note about that under Nexus? I'm thinking, I'm sure it's the dude with the floating table.
Yep, it is. He's not in my army at the moment.
That's what I was going to ask, so you don't have him. And
I couldn't fit him in.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
we'll get to actual what you've got in your army in a minute. Let's just keep talking about skulls, even though obviously we've got slightly distracted there. So Forge World is permitted.
Yep.
Have you got any Forge World?
No. There's nothing for Gene Stellar Cults. It's only Tyranids, really, and I don't own it, so I'm not fielding it.
Fair enough.
Unless you give me permission to do an express order from Forge World.
Guess what? No. Purely because you wouldn't have time to paint it and get it all built and everything.
Oh, you never know.
And the army list is due in. So out of the goodness of my heart, I'll actually say no. So then there is obviously the awards are Best General, Best Overall, Painting, and a
Player's Choice.
Player's Choice for favourite opponent.
It's favourite army. There's no sportsmanship or favourite opponent at all in this event.
See, does it actually go through and define what favourite army means?
Well,
because that's something that I think that we really need to do with our favourite game award.
So they've got a little matrix here for the awards breakdown, which is on page 3 of the Players Pack, which I'll link in the show notes. The awards listed above will be given to players based on how well they score in each of the event's categories. The table outlines the weighing for each category for the 5 awards. So you've got overall, general...
50% generalship and 50% for painting.
Yeah, which is the judge painting.
Yep.
Then you've got best general is 100% of your generalship score. Best army is 100% of your painting, aesthetics, organizer, judge scoring. And most popular army is defined as the painting popular vote.
Ah, okay, right.
So, there is a sportsmanship clause here, which says sportsmen will not be judged. Players are expected to conduct themselves in the spirit of friendly competition, courteous, open-minded, and respectful. A player is concerned about their opponent for cheating, misconstruing rules, or behaving in an unsportsmanlike manner. They should first raise it with their opponent. If their response is unsatisfactory, the TO should be called over to resolve the dispute. If a player is found to be cheating or consistently found to be playing in an unsportsmanlike way, this player may be asked to leave. It is the player's responsibility to act on bad sportsmanship and be open about it at the time of its occurrence. The TO will be unable to act after the tournament is finished.
It feels like I've heard that before.
Yeah. Look, it's I'm assuming this is because it actually says unlike previous Skulls tournaments. So I'm assuming this is something that the TO's added to the event to manage the expectations.
Yeah,
which is good.
And even though I guess for me it was just that definition of the award for favourite army being peer judged painting.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing 2 sets of painting, which we can talk about in a second, actually. But
because you've worked out that you think that out of the 30 available points, you're going to aim for 15.
Yeah, my goal is 15 off the scorecard.
Which is interesting, because when he went through the little score chart, he thought he might be able to hit 12 or 13.
I reckon
where he's going to pull the other 3 from, I'm not sure.
Well, what's really good at any of the players packs that give you this breakup is always really useful.
Yeah, it's great.
Because you can start self-grading really quickly. So you get, there's 3 categories, standard, advanced, and hobby extras. So the 12, 12, and up to 6 for hobby extras. So your max score's 30. Is the army painted to at least the 3 colours per model, plus 3 points? Mine will meet that. Is the army finished? No. It won't be finished. So I'm going to write those 4 points off straight away. Have the bases been painted and textured? Yes, they will be. So that's another 2 points. Does the army look like an army? 2 points. Yes, it will, because it'll all match and be in a theme.
Scheme, yep.
Did the player paint the entire army themselves? Yes, I did. So that's 8 out of 12 for that first category. The advanced one is where I lose basically almost all the points.
Yeah, I think when we went through it, you thought you might get 1.
Have the details been painted? Eyes, equipment pouches?
Nope.
No. The chances of that happening are reasonably
really
low.
Slim.
If I can manage to get some of it done, then I might squeeze a point out of that, but realistically, it's probably a 0. Shading and highlighting used on the army? Yeah, there will be. So whether I get the full 2 points because they won't be finished, probably not, but I'll probably get 1 point out of that. Does the general and or centerpiece model stand out? 1 point. I'm certainly going to put more effort into those than the rest of the army, so hopefully they will.
See, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because if you put too much extra effort in...
Everything else looks unfinished.
Well, exactly, and you haven't got consistent painting across your whole army.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of
there's
walk that line.
The only thing that in consistency this talks about is, does the army look like an army? Consistent colour scheme, not consistent finish. So
we talk about consistent finish in ours.
Has any freehand work been applied? Yeah, probably not. I might get some hazard stripes on if I get the time, but realistically, it's probably a no.
Probably not.
Has the army been converted? 2 points. I should get both of those points because just about the entire army is converted in some way, shape, or form. The Sentinels have got converted pilots piloting them. All of the acolytes are converted with hand flamers and all the rest of it. The aberrants will have conversions in them. The characters have all got head swaps and conversions through them. The neophytes are the same. So I'm expecting to get at least 1 point, hopefully both those points out of the army. Extra effort put into the bases can be just for large bases or centerpiece models. Look, realistically, probably not. So I reckon I can get 4 points out of that category, which gives me 12 so far. And then the hobby extras, I reckon I can get 3 points out of. Army list presentation, themed army, themed dice, army background, in-game markers, display boards, anything else I didn't think of. I reckon I can get 3 out of 6 for that. Because I've got a lot of it already prepared. So
my suggestion for people who, this has already been and gone, but for people who come to our events, if you have a look at in the player's pack where it's got the breakdown of how the painting is scored, feel free to have like a bit of paper there that's got your name on it. Put your name next to your army, because that's really useful for when you're doing peer judged. Because if you just put your army out and there's 30 people there, or, for some of our events when we've got...
50, 60 or more.
Yeah. People don't know whose army is whose, so it makes it very difficult to vote for you if I don't know who you are.
I'm not expecting votes for this army.
No, fair enough. I'm actually not talking about the peer judged, even though I did just jump that in there. But put your name on it, and then add things like where it's got conversions, make some notes about what conversions you've done. If you've done them really well and the person judging painting is unfamiliar with that particular army...
Yeah, you'd never know.
You can't pick them out. So things like the fact that you've swapped all the weapons on this particular unit, or you've...
Head swaps and reposes.
That kind of thing. Yeah. Or, some people have hand sculpted from green stuff tongues, or, that kind of thing. But they've done it so well that you can't tell that that's...
And like you say, if you're not familiar with the model range, then you can be left losing points for just simply not knowing what you're looking at.
So make sure that you found a way to share that with the person who's judging.
Well, I remember when we used to do ultimates in the sort of the late 2000s, you had to hand a cover sheet in with your army list.
Yeah.
And it basically had a question there like, do you want to draw the judge's attention to any particular part of your army? And when I entered that event, it was... these are the models that have been converted. This is how they've been converted. This is why they, and that way when the judges go around and score, they know
what to look for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And same with the hobby extras. Often this is judged while the games are happening.
Yeah.
So, I have to go to people, hey, have you got any custom objective markers? Have you got custom dice? Have you got, have you got, what else is there? A display board.
Display boards
have you got a story somewhere?
Yeah.
If it's written here that you have got, if it's written that you've got freehand detail, if it's written that you've got any of these hobby extras, I can then look at that and go, hey, can you show me this particular model that's got this on there? Whereas what happens when I go around, and I know, I'm sorry, I've totally gone off track again, but these things pop into my head and I feel like they need to come out my mouth. I go around and I have to say to players, hey, have you got any hobby extras like this? And they go, no. Okay, have you got any conversions? No. Are there any identifying unit markers? No. Have you got any freehand? No. And so
maybe we need to institute a cover page that
that's
you
what
actually
I'm thinking.
You actually bring when you sign in. You hand your cover page in,
or you just have it next to your army.
Handing it in, I think, with a basic sort of checklist of stuff that we're looking for.
Can I be honest? I think having it next to your army works better for me because it means that when I go around, I can pick it up and then I can take the name that's on the top. I can plug it into down under pairings.
Yep.
I can open it up and then so if I go up to someone and go, can I have your painting cover sheet? Then they can hand it to me and I know what I'm asking for.
Yeah, actually, it's a good point.
Just to finish off my thought before, I'm never asking to criticize someone or to point out the fact that they don't have these things. I'm always trying to find out how can I give you more points.
More points? Yeah.
But when they're going, no, 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 I don't want to ask anymore because I feel like I'm totally demoralizing this person because they haven't got any of the things I'm asking for.
Yeah, fair enough.
And at the last event, I was asking someone who goes, I painted this whole army in 3 weeks. I'm like, dude, you've done really well. I'm just trying to see if I can
give you more points.
Give you a couple of extra points. So, I think that's probably a good idea for us. And I know that we're talking about Skulls and not our event, but Skulls has already gone by the time this has gone out. So.
And we should also say that they are using down under pairings for this event for the scoring side of things, which is really helpful. I know that this is going to be the first time that the TOs use this particular software, so
and it's another Mike.
Yep.
Who's doing this?
And obviously, I've already spoken to him and said if you need any help on the day, I'm happy to help. And I know that obviously down under pairings themselves, their support's really good. So if there's any issues, then obviously that.
Yeah, and you're more than happy to panic with people if things don't go right.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine. And look, I really like that down under pairings is actually being used because it's going to lift a lot of the weight off of the TO, hopefully, on the day.
Yeah.
So.
And it's funny because I always find it quite surprising now to see events still being run with pen and paper.
Yeah. Anything more than 10 or 12 players is just crazy.
It's just really interesting seeing it because I think, oh man, do you know how much easier it is when you use one of these? Even Best Coast pairings, even though it doesn't have a lot of the functionality that we love that down under pairings have, it still made it so much easier for us.
Yeah, it did.
Anyway, sorry, I've digressed enough. Missions. Mission 1 is, I think I said they were all from Chapter Approved 2018.
Yep, it's basically page 48 onwards because they're the Eternal War missions.
Yep, so Mission 1 is Vital Intelligence, which has progressive scoring.
Yep, I think all of them had...
They do all have progressive scoring, actually. You're right, I don't have to mention that for all of them. Did you want to say anything about that? Look,
I think it's worth pointing out that all of these missions... include first strike instead of first blood. So I find that really interesting because I don't know how it's ended up in this book, but we wrote that.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I want to take credit for it.
Like, you can take credit for it, but I think if we thought of it,
somebody else
did as well.
And that's fine, but like our events have run first strike for quite some time now.
Yeah.
You still got to get Slay the Wall and Line Breaker, and then I believe all of them have acceptable casualties thrown in as well. I'm just double-checking the last one. Yes, it does. So basically it means you're ignoring sudden death, which means that flyer armies and being tabled doesn't automatically end the game.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good because all the practice games for my Genestealer Cult in the Index, I got tabled turn 3. So it means I get to stand there for the next 5 turns. It's great.
Perfect.
4 turns.
So mission number 2 is Narrow the Search.
Yep. Actually, going back very quickly to Vital Intelligence.
Okay. Mission 1 is Vital Intelligence.
What they have done with the player spec is they have actually specified the deployment types for each mission, which is probably worth talking about because that does actually change the way that some of the missions will play. So Vital Intelligence is using Frontline Assault with 5 markers, and then they're using the whole full deployment methodology out of Chapter Approved 2018.
So do you think that they've done that with the objective marker placement, the objective placement, to speed things up?
Well, the mission itself, I'm just going to have a quick look at it now. It's they're actually specified where they land. This particular mission.
So that mission does that. Right.
Specifies them and numbers them 1 through 5 because you actually roll to see which one becomes active, and then on a 6, all of them become active. Okay. And then the more you hold, the more points you score.
Yeah.
So they've got frontline assault with this particular mission. Obviously, all of these are going to be much. You're going to have a much better day of it with troops choices predominantly because obviously more bodies means more scoring. Which makes me happy because I've got a ton of units and there's no kill points, so I'm not giving up stuff for running so many individual units.
Is that all of your army?
Over on the tub?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a ton to me.
Every one of those vehicles is separate. So there's 9 straight away. Then there's 5 or 6 characters plus 5 units. It'll be like 20 kill points or something. So it's really good because I'm not having to worry about
that. Awesome.
I could split that unit of acolytes into 5s. I haven't submitted the army list yet. That might be a thing I have to think about.
Okay, well, we'll have a chat about that in a minute.
Yep. So Vital Intelligence is a pretty standard Maelstrom one, and I think that's a good way to kick the day off. Narrow the Search, you said, was the second one.
I did indeed.
So what have they done for that? They have picked Hammer and Anvil. Hammer and Anvil is a really polarizing deployment. It's the long, short edge to short edge. And this one on top of that, this particular...
So short edge to short edge, because this confuses some people. So you deploy along the 4-foot edge and you move lengthwise. So you move the 6 feet.
You play down the 6 feet.
Towards the other... Yeah, so you and your opponent's armies are up to 6 feet apart.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah. Just because when we've talked about short edge to short edge before, people have thought that that's the other way around.
So, yeah. Now, this particular mission, I'm interested to play. I haven't played this mission at all. This is a mission I would never put in a tournament.
Oh, why is that?
So the mission itself is you create the battlefield, set up the terrain, and then place one objective marker at the center of the table. Pretty straightforward.
Yep. So far, I'm with you.
Deployment, blah, 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 blah. First turn, blah, 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 blah. Acceptable casualties is fine. Then you get the first rule, which is null field. Invulnerable saving throws cannot be made for units that are within 12 of the objective marker.
Ah.
Which basically means this mission, if you're playing demons, if you're playing harlequins, they're probably the 2 that spring instantly to mind, where their whole durability revolves around their invulnerable saves, and the fact they're toughness 3, 1 wound with no armor, means winning this mission is really...
tricky.
All but impossible in some cases. I mean, harlequins, when you're paying 125 points for a character that's toughness 3 with no saving throws within 12 of that objective, and you need to hold that objective to score points.
But that's only one objective.
There's only one objective.
Oh, so more don't go down?
No.
Oh, okay, right. Okay.
And that's my biggest concern with this mission. But it'd be interesting to play it. My army actually doesn't feature a single invulnerable save, so I don't care about this mission.
So...
But
do you think you can basically just hide for 5 turns and then go in and try?
This is progressive scoring.
Ah, okay.
So zeroing in is the rule. At the end of each battle round, the player who controls the objective marker scores 1 point. If the player controls the objective marker, if they have more models within the distance than their opponent does. At the end of battle round 1, this distance is 18 inches and it shrinks by 3. At the end of each battle round to a minimum of 3 inches. So the player with the most models within 15 of the center of the objective marker at the end of turn 2, within 12 at the end of turn 3, and so on. So basically, you hold the objective.
And does the invulnerability...
No, it's always 12 inches.
And that's for each turn?
Yeah, so it's a 12-inch bubble of no invulnerables.
It's just that when you talked about it, you talked about first turn.
Well, they're 2 separate rules. So one's null zone, which is just a flat no invulnerable within 12. But then the scoring component of the mission says... At turn 1, if you've got the most models within 18 you score a point.
Yeah.
And then it's 15 inches... Then it's 12.
So if you have them within 18 inches, you still have invulnerability at that point.
You still have your invulnerable saves.
You've got a 6-inch buffer.
Yep. So come turn 3, if you want to score points in turns 3 onwards, you're losing your invul saves. So, and obviously being that close, depending on what you're playing, being within 18 of the objective seems pretty... I mean, this is Hammer and Anvil as well, so you can't even... That 18 inches doesn't actually... It's... almost all of no man's land to start the game off. Yeah. But it very rapidly will deteriorate. So if you're not fast enough to keep up in it, and obviously that's going to close you with the enemy every turn. That doesn't bother me because I'm playing Gene Stealers. But it definitely messes with some armies, and if you don't have those invul saves, you're paying the points for those. So it's
interesting to see how it goes.
Yeah, it's a really polarizing game. It'll be interesting to see the results after the fact. It'll also be interesting to see how the other guys who are going, who I know are playing, and what they're running to play it. But yeah, it's one that I would mentally, when I read it, I'd already just gone, that doesn't belong in competitive play, because it invalidates certain armies that pay the point, like the cost of those models includes their invulnerable saves.
But do you not see that that's part of the, like, do you not have to come up with some strategy in order to be able to use that?
The problem is there's no way around that loss. And if you're paying 24 points for a basic Harlequin with its war gear upgrades, a big chunk of those 24 points is factored in its 4-up invulnerable save. Whereas if you buy a 13-point Space Marine without an invulnerable save, he's still got his 3-up armor.
What about if you take a fortification?
Can't deploy it in the bubble.
Oh, damn.
I like your out-of-the-box thinking, but no, you can't deploy it that way.
Maybe this is one of the ways we get fortifications on the table in competitive play.
And the worst, I mean, demons don't have any vehicles to hide in. So they, like, a demon army has no choice at that point. And they don't have any real shooting either, so they have to close. So losing their invulnerable saves means, bolt guns just gun them down. Heavy bolters gun them down.
I don't like to create sweeping statements like this doesn't belong in competitive play.
Well, and that's fair enough. I'm just saying I haven't played it. That was a caveat I did make. For me, if there's a number of concerns I have around this mission at a competitive event, it'll be interesting to see whether those concerns are actually valid or not.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
And good on them for taking a risk and putting something in there that's different.
Yep, absolutely. 4 pillars, I think, was the third one.
That is correct.
So this is the same thing. You're basically deploying what is literally 4 pillars, fixed deployment of them. And it's Dawn of War, so it's standard long edge to long edge. So you're playing across the 4-foot space, not down the board.
Yep.
This is
so
one.
You have 6 feet to deploy your army in.
We've actually used this one at First Blood this year.
Yes, I do remember seeing that.
So again, it's you score points if you hold more than your opponent. If you control all of them, you score more points again. Mm-hmm. And this one, you do actually, if you kill more units than your opponent does in that battle round, you score points as well. So there is a kill point sort of component of this game, which is probably the one that I'll give up the most on, but it depends on who I play, because there's a big sort of variation in their ability to kill me, basically.
Yeah, and
so it's a nice balancing mission, because when you take an army like mine where I've got 20 something units,
and
that mission hurts.
It's round 3 as well.
Yeah.
So
it's the make or break round before the final.
Well, yeah. Plus, also, for round 1, obviously that's, I'm assuming, random.
It looks like it's a random draw.
So by round 3, you should be seated with people who are roughly on the same kind of level as you. And the thing is, you don't know where you're going to be because you've never.
No, I've no idea what the army's
going to
do. No idea.
So Mike's doing what we always say not to do, and that's I bang on about how important it is to practice with your army and know your army inside out and know what it can do. And he's kind of going with a winging it method of.
But there's methodology to this madness, because it's going to give me 4 practice games in one day.
Yeah.
In the right environment that I want to be playing it in.
And you're going to get a chance to play some games.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's nothing.
If you had to play practice games beforehand, you wouldn't get them.
But part of also what we talk about in the prep guide is in that preparation process is about setting your own goals for the event. And winning the event isn't a goal that I've factored into this. It's getting the army on the table, getting it to a basic paint standard, then actually trying to get 2 out of 4 games that I win.
We didn't talk about mission number 4. So
no,
that's supplies from above.
We go back to frontline assault again, which is interesting. So the 6 deployment types, we're using Dawn of War in round 3. We're using Hammer and Anvil in round 2. And then we're using frontline assault twice, round 1 and round 4, according to the players pack.
Okay.
So it's basically Dawn of War, but it's pointy Dawn of War.
Yeah. That's pretty much what I was going to describe it as.
Well, there's pointy Dawn of War and there's pointy Hammer and Anvil, which is spearhead assault.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about frontline assault is that there's only an 18-inch gap between the armies instead of the standard 24, which is what Dawn of War has, which is good and bad for a lot of armies because it's that sort of triangular shape. It pushes you back the closer you get to the edges of the table, because there's only a 6-inch deployment zone on the edges of the table. So I'm going to bring up the picture here so you can understand what I'm trying to explain.
No, I know what you. I wasn't 100% listening. I was.
Thanks.
No, because I was thinking about the 18-inch.
Yeah.
Thing, but that's narrow the search, which isn't the same deployment.
No, it's not.
So I was just clicking it through my head.
Oh, okay.
So just for people who are listening, normally before we come on and do one of these episodes, I create pages of notes and I'm totally organised, and that's not how we're doing this one.
No. So yeah, that
so all of these potentially stupid questions that I'm asking, I would normally ask off air.
Yeah.
So you don't get those. But today, guess what?
So look, that 18-inch differential means that you potentially start with units in charge range, start with units in rapid fire range, start with units...
but you also potentially start with units in holding objective markers.
Well, obviously, depending on the missions. I mean, this particular mission, so we're playing supplies from above.
Supplies from above. I haven't seen what the deployment zone is for this one.
Which is the same. This is frontline assault. So mission 1 and mission 4 use the same deployment type according to the player's pack, which is pointy dawn of war.
Yeah. So
and
that's
then,
the 5 in the... So you got a box with 1 in the middle.
No, so this is the only mission where you actually get to deploy them yourself for the actual mission itself. So the deployment type is fixed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was talking about the objective placement.
So these objective markers you roll off for, and then they can be placed anywhere on the battlefield, more than 12 from each other and more from 6 from a board edge.
Okay, right.
So I don't actually think... with frontline assault, or maybe it is, I'd have to do the maths, but frontline assault I think means that the fixed deployment types, I don't know you actually end up with them in your deployment zones. So yeah, it's going to be interesting because winning that role to decide where you get to place 3 of the objective markers is a double-edged sword, because then you have to roll off again for deployment. So if you don't deploy them evenly, you could potentially just give it to your opponent.
Yeah,
and that can be a good tactic if you have an army that works well in that circumstance. Or any army that's going to be hyper aggressive and try and cross the table to the opponent as fast as possible wants objectives where it's going to be, not where it starts.
True. Yep.
So,
but then would you actually bother crossing the table?
Yeah,
because it's all about holding objectives.
Yeah.
So what's the point going over and crossing the table? Why wouldn't you just stay there and be defensive?
Well, if you just stand there, you're going to get shot to pieces most of the time.
I guess if you've got shorter range.
If you've got nothing left, then your opponent's going to win. What's more...
I'm very much for hiding.
See,
it's a great tactic.
What's most interesting about this, though, is when you actually read the victory conditions. So the rule is secure supply. Starting from the second battle round, each player scores 1 victory point for each objective marker they control at the start of their turn. Cool. A player that controls objective markers if they have more models within 3. Cool. However, and this is the bit that you go, oh god, they're going to screw with me again. If only one player has models that can fly, excluding those with the fly battlefield roll within 3, they control it, regardless of the number of nearby enemy models. So basically what that means is you have jump pack troops, anything that's not a flyer battlefield roll, if you've got 1 model, that's all you need to actually claim it, regardless of the enemy models.
Yeah.
No, the Gene Still Occult army has 0 ways outside of allies to get anything with the fly keyword. So that's an immediate problem I have for Game 4, where I have to hope the draw is kind and there's not too many jump sort of style units. But given how good they are in the game, the chances of that happening are reasonably low. Because all the Eldar vehicles have fly, the Dark Eldar vehicles have fly, the Harlequin vehicles have fly. There's a proliferation of
so this
those sorts
is
of
why
units.
If you have read the tabletop prep guide, or if you happen to be a patron and you've
downloaded it and listened to
downloaded it, but more about the fact heard us going through and slowly breaking down that prep guide and giving a whole heap of more information. This is one of the reasons that we talk about the importance of reading the player's pack before actually creating your army, because you've come up with 2
2 issues.
2 issues for 2 of the missions out of 4 missions.
Yep.
And your goal is to hopefully win
2 out of 4. Yep.
You kind of left going, well, I kind of need to do well with those 2 because I don't have much chance with these ones. So if your goal is to win the event, you're really behind the 8 ball here.
Absolutely. I think the draw obviously plays a part because obviously if I face an enemy that doesn't have fly either, then it's not relevant. But
no, it's not. But as you've said,
the chances are, in the final round, if you're playing on the top tables, the chances of your opponent having something that flies are reasonably high.
And we also talk about, and whether you're on the top tables with this one is debatable.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath.
But we also talk about in the prep guide knowing who's coming to the event and what they're likely to be taking based on what they've taken to past events. So without naming any names, who are you? How many of the players that you know are going do you anticipate having those?
I would bet probably 50% would have a reasonable or prolific number of units with the fly keyword, would be my guess.
Of the people who you think are going to be the top 50% of players, what percentage do you reckon are going to have those?
I'd guess at least 75% of them should. That would be my guess. The good part about some of these events, particularly with Down Under Pairings, is you can actually go and have a look. So I've registered for this event on Down Under Pairings. Not everyone has yet.
Yep.
But if I then click on army lists, I can see 2 have been submitted. One's Death Guard and one's Knights. And everything else is unknown.
Right.
But normally you actually get a chance to look at who's signed up for it. So if I go players leaderboard, I can see all the player names. And there's a few there that have been received army lists, but you start going through them. Anthony Ellison, a very regular player of ours, he's probably playing Tau.
Yeah, I think that's
he's got an Orc army in the works, though, so he could come out of the bag and do something a bit crazy. Dean Langford, I haven't seen a tournament in a while, but he's always playing Nids. Doug Bowen and Doug Todd, we see fairly reasonably, but they're Imperial players primarily. Although I feel like one of them plays Nids, but I've seen them both with Imperial armies.
I know one of them's got a really cool plane thing, but I can't remember what it is. I've got nothing.
Matt Bell will be playing Eldar of some kind. Rory Clune will probably be Imperial with Knights. Ryan Buck, I'm assuming, will be playing his new Chaos forces. His
well, Rory's in there, and one of them's Knights.
So it's probably a good guess.
Probably him, yeah.
Ryan will probably be playing his new Iron Warriors army, and that, particularly since the Vigilus. I don't know if the new Vigilus Book 2 comes out. I don't know if that makes the cut for this mission. Tom White, Tom's a wild card. He could, I suspect, we'll see him playing Eldar.
Is that what he's taking for ETC?
I don't know.
Okay.
The ATC team, I would assume whatever he's playing at ATC is what he'll bring, but he's been playing
did
Eldar.
I just say ETC? I meant ATC. Yeah.
And Tyson Linthorne's a guard player from a way back. I know that.
Really hope these people whose names we've just...
By the time they hear it, it's fine.
No, but don't mind us going through and going, oh, they normally play this and they normally play that.
No, but this is something that anyone can actually go and do.
Yeah.
Then you've also got guys like Richard. He'll be bringing Imperial something. You've also got Dave, who's won the last 3 events that we've...
so what, Leon... Is it Leon?
Yep.
Do you know what he normally plays?
Death Guard, normally.
And what are the 2 that are
Death
in there?
Guard.
Okay. So you can fairly safely say he's taking Death Guard and Rory's taking Knights.
Yeah. I'm not going to go digging and trying to figure that out, but that's
a fairly safe assumption.
Yeah. Dave's coming, and he and I talk regularly.
He will be
taking
Dark
some
Eldar.
sort of Eldar. I actually think he's taking Craftworld rather than Dark
Just
Eldar this time.
Just to prove me wrong?
Yep. I know, because he's been asking to borrow some of my Craftworld stuff.
Okay. Oh, well, that's cheating. You had insider knowledge.
So, you can start...
And I apologise, Drakari, not Dark Eldar.
No, there's still Dark Eldar to me.
For the person who pulls me up every single time I call them Dark Eldar.
I'm allowed to say it because I've been playing them longer. So, you can kind of start betting on it, going, okay, well, there's probably a third of the field in here that are fly at the moment. There's only 13 names in the list. So, they've got 30... They've asked... Yeah, they've asked to borrow some terrain and boards off us to get the numbers to what they've actually got attending. Yeah. So 36 players, I reckon getting 16 to 18 of them with a proliferation of fly is an unachievable guess. So, when you start knowing the players that you're playing against, you can go through and do what I've just done and go, oh, okay. And you can even, if you really wanted to, go back, say you didn't know who Anthony Ellison was, you could then click on him, see which events he's played at, and obviously that you've played at. Then you can go back into the past event and look at his army lists.
Yeah.
So...
And see how much they change.
Yeah. And you can start making predictions at that point.
Yeah, like Anthony and Ryan generally have quite...
Well, they've both got good extensive collections.
Yeah, but I tend to see them
units.
both playing very similar armies at majority of the events. And you've just said that there's a chance that they're both going to be playing a different army for this event. But I think that you could make an educated guess that they would both be coming and they'd both have Tau and they'd both have...
Well, like I say, I know that Ryan announced after Masters last year he was retiring the Tau from tournament play to focus on his Iron Warriors.
Yeah.
And I know Anthony's been building orcs, but whether he's got 1,500 points ready for it, and Anthony's not the type to bring unpainted armies.
And neither's Ryan.
No. So... Which
does bring me to back to Skulls for a second, in that there is no painting requirement for this event.
No, it's... they would prefer fully painted. They prefer
Tabletop.
3-colour minimum.
Yeah.
But it's not required.
No. So if you follow along on the OBSEC page and you saw me having a bit of a
go at me.
I was going to say gentle teasing because we had a conversation and,
because I can fill the army now.
Well, no, you can't because you've still not got no wheels.
They have got wheels on them. It's fine.
They are on a different lid, okay? So, we were talking about it, and he goes, oh, yeah, no, it's all good. I'm going to take my Gene Steeler Cult because there's no painting requirements. And I cut him off and went, are you going to take unpainted models? And he goes, based on that face, that tone, and that comment? No. No, I'm not. I'm
going to paint them.
I'll paint those models. Good. So
it'll be fine. My plan at the moment is most of them have been undercoated grey. I've rented a grey spray paint, so that's the thing that'll have to happen in the next day or two. Then they get a dry brush, and then I paint the boots and the weapons, and then I'm going to wash them, and then I'm going to paint the orange, and then I'm going to paint the skin and wash the skin, and that's the end of them.
No, that's not true, because just a little while ago when you just told me this before in the other episode, you said you were going to go back and put the silver on for...
Yeah, but I think if I put the silver on first, then I can wash them all in one pass. It's another step that adds more depth.
You've thought about it since, have you?
I've been thinking about it.
Right.
So...
Okay, is there anything else we want to talk about for the event?
No. It's a long day. The last game doesn't finish till 6:30 or something, so it's going to be a long day.
Yeah, he's just adding a bit of time on there. The last game doesn't finish till like 7:30 or 8 o'clock.
No.
I definitely won't be standing out in the car park talking for an hour.
Hey, look, I saw that the close time was 7 o'clock, and because we're assisting with terrain and boards, I have to wait until I've actually got all my terrain and boards back. So the doors officially close at 7 o'clock.
Right.
So, and because I'm not there as a TO, then if everyone heads to the pub, I might have to go and join them for a drink or something, because I'll have missed dinner by that stage, because I won't be home before 8, even if I left at 7. So, we'll see.
I might have to leave the kids with Mum, and I might have to come and join you at the pub.
Oh, that sounds like a good idea.
For the sake of marketing and networking and all of that kind of thing.
Let's do that.
All right, so...
Army.
All right, now, as I said, I have absolutely no prep work done for this particular
and
part
look, to be honest, what I talk about now could be very different to what I do at list submission, because it's still in flux at the moment as I come up with new ideas, and as we've been recording the last podcast, I've come up with other options.
Right.
So as it stands now, the list...
So it's 1,500 points.
Yep, and 2 detachments.
Yes. Right. I'm writing my notes.
Okay. So
1,500 points, 2 detachments.
So the first detachment...
How many? And 9 CP?
No. So you get 3 for Battleforge, like normal. Mm-hmm. And then you get CP based on which detachments you pick.
Right.
So my thought process originally was to take a brigade, which is plus 12 CP, which sounds fantastic. The downside is you need 3 elite, 3 fast, 3 heavy, 3 HQ, and 6 troops.
I'm not sure you can manage that.
Now, I do have the models to manage it, with the exception of heavy support. Heavy support is the stumbling point, because I just don't have the models for it.
Yeah.
I've spoken to a few people to see if I could borrow the models for it, and that is achievable. But it also doesn't fit with the way I think the army should be played at this point in time.
Okay, so would you be choosing to take it as
a brigade?
As a brigade, based purely on the fact that you can get that many CP?
Yeah.
Would that be the only thing?
Yeah.
Okay, and what's the downside to doing that? Why don't you think that works that way?
Because you have to max out the detachments. You have to max it out. You have to take 3, 3, 3, 3, and 6.
Yeah.
you force yourself into a position where you might not want 3 HQs, or you might not want to spend the points on 3 fast attacks, and that creates a situation where you're essentially paying a tax for the army to get those command points. So you've got to balance.
And what do you lose from doing that?
Yeah. So as soon as I realised that I had to take those heavies and I don't have access to those models, and the ones that I would want to use no one has, which is mainly the rock grinders, I went, okay.
Which do sound really cool.
Well, I love them. And I really want to put an army with 3 of them plus a bunch of other vehicles together. But that's a long-term project, not a short-term. So the next option at that point is a double battalion, using both detachment slots. You get plus 5 for each of them. So you're getting 10 instead of 12. But you only have to fill 2 HQs in each and 3 troops in each. So you don't any longer have to take the elites, the fast, or the heavy.
Yeah.
Which fixes one of my problems, which is the heavy support slots. The problem with the Gene Stealer cult is you want the elites, which is where all those characters that sit in the space are.
Yeah, yeah.
And the model collection I have at the moment is also very fast attack heavy. So that doesn't really suit me, because then I'm having to take more troop choices, which means splitting up units and running 5-man squads, and having to mess around with where the HQs go. And at the moment, the only way for me to do it would mean dropping something in the elites to shuffle units around to make them into a double battalion, because I've actually got 4 HQs in the army already, and I've got 4 troops, and one of those troops I could cut in half and turn into 2 units of 5 instead of 1 unit of 10.
Is that the Acolytes?
That's my Acolyte squad.
Yeah.
But then a lot of the buffs that go on them are less effective because they're smaller squads. Instead of a squad of 10 with me casting a psychic power on them, now I've got 2 units of 5, which I can only affect with one. Well, only one of them can be affected with a power.
Okay.
So there is an efficiency in going big with a Gene Stealer cult army. And I think that at the moment, I'm better off with the bigger squads at the cost of less CP than I am with breaking the units up and then losing an elite choice to get those extra couple of CP. So I've ended up with a 1 battalion and an outrider. So the battalion this is pretty standard for 40k. It's 2 HQs and 3 troops minimum. The outrider is the fast attack one, so it's 1 HQ and 3 fast attack minimum. And that, like I said, that's kind of suits the models that I own. So they're the minimum requirements, and then obviously you can build around those for each detachment. And originally it was all going to be Rusted Claw, but after going through and doing the last podcast, it makes sense to make the Outrider a different Hive Cult.
Yeah.
As you use the Hive Cult for them rather than Rusted Claw. So the Outrider is a Jackal Alphas as the HQ, and then 3 single model Ridge Runners, each with a mining laser and flare launchers.
Yep.
And they're all Hive Cult.
Okay.
The Jackal Alphas potentially ends up being the Warlord. I haven't quite figured that out yet, mainly because she's going to be hanging away from the action. So she's -1 to hit. She's probably the most durable of the characters I have.
Oh.
And she's got a sniper rifle.
Yeah.
So she doesn't have to be in the thick of it. And because her buffs are only going to work on the Ridge Runners anyway, there's no reason for her to get close to the enemy and put herself in harm's way.
Yeah.
So at that point, I then give her the Gift from Beyond sniper rifle upgrade, the Relic, which means that she's hitting on 2s. So at the start of the shooting phase, she picks a target, and she picks the target that the Ridge Runners are going to be shooting at. She gives the Ridge Runners will all get +1 to hit as a result of that. She will then shoot at that target, and as long as she hits on 2s, and then she wounds on 4s because of the Relic, and as long as she rolls a 4 or higher to wound, she deals a guaranteed mortal wound. And once I've done that, that then triggers me to let me spend 2 command points to give all of those Ridge Runners another +1 to hit, which means they'll be hitting on 2s.
Yeah.
And that's 3d3 mining laser shots, which scares most vehicles and even a knight, because that's 3d3 shots that are going to do d6 damage each.
Okay, so just come back to the CP.
Yep.
With your...
It's called chilling efficiency is the stratagem.
Chilling efficiency. I shall write that down for when we come back and review this in a fortnight. I'm going to have to look at this and go, what the heck have I written there? So you've got the 1 battalion and the Outrider.
Yep. So that's all the Outrider is literally what I've just described.
The HQ and the 3 fast attack.
Yep.
Yep, and the Hive Cult. Okay, so what CP do you...
+1 for that detachment. So I start with 3.
Yes.
I get +1 for the Outrider, and I get +5 for the Battalion. So I start the tournament with 9 per game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the problem with chilling efficiency is it is fairly expensive because it is 2 CP.
Yeah, well, that's what I was looking at. But I guess if you then making...
Well, the goal for her to burn that off is probably only turns 1 and turn 2.
Yeah.
Because...
Still using 4 with that, though.
Yeah, but if it means that those Ridge Runners... Because I'm assuming that once I start firing those Ridge Runners mining lasers, most people are going to go, oh, they need to die now. So I don't expect them to last much past turn 2 anyway. But...
It's nice to have good expectancy.
But that's where most of my heavy support firepower comes from. So burning through, even if it's 3 turns of fire from them to get at the cost of 6 CP, there's enough value there for me to, if they're hitting a vehicle, killing a vehicle every turn, the army struggles with that. And there's 2 CP is actually worth doing at that point. And if I choose not to go down that road, they'll still hit on 3s thanks to her. So it'll ultimately depend on the target. And if you're firing at some of the Eldar armies that are -2 or -3 to hit, then you need those buffs to actually make it viable.
To make it happen.
So it's a nice option to have as an up my sleeve. If I really want them to hit, then I can burn the CP and actually make it happen. If I don't necessarily need them to hit, then I can obviously, wear that and only hit on 3s, which is completely acceptable. It's pretty standard for the game for elite armies.
Yep.
As for her being Warlord, like I said, part of me wants to do it because I think that her chances of survival go up significantly when she's the one hiding at the back of the table outside of, out of the main conflict.
Yeah.
The Hive Cult, Warlord trait is actually really good for her in this case because it's called Hive Lord. Reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made with ranged weapons for friendly Hive Cult units whilst they're within 6. So by making her the Warlord, they'll be hitting on 3s after she gives them the first buff. And then if I spend 2 CP, they'll be hitting on 2s. And then if I give her that Warlord trait, they're rerolling 1s. Yeah. Which makes them really efficient in terms of I should be hitting with the majority, if not all, of the shots they take. So that seems like a really natural... For what I want her to do, that seems like a really natural choice. It does, however, mean that, she becomes the Warlord, so I don't get the benefits of some of the other generic Warlord traits that potentially affect more units in the army.
Yes.
So, that being said, most of the generic ones at least, like Alien Majesty is probably the next one to look at, which increases her range of her auras by 3, or Shadowstalker, which makes her another -1 to hit. The Biomorph adaptation doesn't do anything for her because it's a combat upgrade. The Focus of Adoration lets people heroically intervene, but you don't really want that. Born Survivor reduces damage, but ultimately she's so squishy that when she starts taking damage, she's probably dead anyway. And Preternatural Speed is a combat one as well.
So you pick one of these?
So I pick one of them. So the 6 core ones, there's 1 or maybe 2 that I would take.
Yeah.
But based on what she's going to be doing for the army, it just makes sense to make her the Warlord and give her Hive Lord. And because the units I've picked in the form of the Ridge Runners are cult units that actually get the keyword, even though they don't benefit from the fallback and shoot option, which the Hive Cult Creeds gives, they've still got the keyword. Yeah. So she gets that rule. She's the only model that gets that rule. But
useful.
that's my theory at the moment. And I think that even hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s gives them about an 80-ish% success rate. Yeah. So even if I don't have to spend the CP, or I don't have the CP to spend, they're probably still fairly accurate at that point. And I think this is going to be one of the ways that the Ridge Runners and the Rock Grinders with mining lasers actually becomes a viable choice in the army. You just have to kind of layer them to get these buffs off. Yeah. It does mean that killing the Warlord becomes even more useful to the enemy, but them's the breaks. Yeah. So then the battalion.
Yes. So 2 HQ, 3 troops.
Yep. And then I've also got...
And with Rusted Claw with that one.
Yep. And then I've also got 3 fast attacks. I've actually got 4 troops. 3 fast attacks and 3 elites, I think it is. 2 elites. No, 3 elites. So I'm running a Magus, a Primus, and an Icon Ward for my 3 HQs.
So you got 3
So there's actually 3 in this detachment. The minimum's 2, but
Okay, right.
I've actually got 3.
Okay.
So the Magus is there for mass hypnosis, mind control, and mental onslaught,
Yes.
depending on what's needed at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He deals mortal wounds, and he gets to manipulate the table. Mass hypnosis will mean that if one of my assault units makes it, then
So
he
you're
can...
working with the male Magus.
Yes. So the models I have are the Brood
Older
Coven ones.
Yep.
So it's the male version, converted, but still male.
Yeah.
The Primus is there for the +1 to hit aura. So again, he goes in with the assault wave, and the Icon Ward is there for the feel no pain aura and potentially the relic if I want to spend 1 CP at the start of the game to give him +1 strength relic.
Yep.
That'll depend on the opponent. But all 3 of those are basically going to go in with the wave to deal with as an assault force.
But you've potentially already used 7 of your CP like that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think it'll depend on how important the Hive Cult the chilling efficiency stratagem is to the game, because the only way that works is you have to deal damage to the target before you can spend those 2 CP. So...
Sorry, can I just interrupt?
Yeah,
again?
yeah.
So with the different creeds,
yeah,
do you choose those when you write the army?
yes, when you're at the army.
Okay, so you can't change those
No.
based on who your opponent is. Okay.
So chilling efficiency only works once you've dealt damage to the target. So then you can spend the CP to give the buff. So the reason that you give her the sniper rifle is to give yourself the better chance of dealing that point of damage first.
Yeah.
To then give the extra +1 to hit. If you decide, you know what, I'm not going to use chilling efficiency this game for whatever reason, then your free relic potentially just goes to the Icon Ward rather than giving her the sniper rifle every time.
Yes.
And that's, again, it's a call you can make on the fly, which is really beneficial. Because you don't have to list the relics. You just make her the Warlord and call it a day. But anyway, back to the battalion. So there's the 3 characters. The elite choices are Acclamavus, which I completely forgot to put in the list, and then realised I wanted that +1 to charge. And the what's the other buff he gives? There's +1 to charge, and he's got a no deep strike area denial ability. It's the +1 to charge I want for him, so he's going to go in with the first wave as well.
Yep.
And his sole purpose is to give my 2 combat units the +1. I've got a Kellamorph. The Kellamorph and the Sanctus are both the same price, and I was throwing up which one I put in the army.
Yeah.
And originally I decided I would put neither and just save those 60 points and then summon the one I wanted.
Yes.
The problem is that the summoning stratagem is 2 command points.
And
when I've only got 9...
out and you've already allocated 7.
Yeah. So at that point, it makes more sense to just pick one, put it in the army, and roll with the outcome regardless.
Yeah.
So if it was a double battalion, I would probably have done it.
Yeah.
But when we get to the units in a second, there's only a couple of ways of me making it a double battalion, and I'm not really fond of any of those. So it's a Kellamorph. There is a gun that I can give him as a relic, or even the dagger as a relic if I want to go down the road of making him more shooty and more stabby.
And are you thinking that you're going to?
Probably not. I think it's going to have to be really situational to want to go down that road for him, because he's going to show up, he's going to shoot something, and then he's probably going to die.
Yeah.
Actually, I tell a lie. He's the only model in the army with an invulnerable save. He's got a 5-up invulnerable. From memory. My 3rd elite choice is a unit of Aberrants. 10 of them. Maxed out unit. There are 6 picks, 2 hammers, and 2 improvised weapons. Those improvised weapons have to be converted yet.
So they could be really improvised, like out of blue tack.
No. I've actually been going through my bits box looking for bits I can put on them. But at this point in time, I'm thinking I'll cut a piece of plastic card into a rough square, cut the head off the hammer that they're holding, and make it into a signpost.
Oh, yeah.
Because that kind of matches the model that Games Workshop released, because these are the overkill ones, so they didn't have that option when they came out.
Yeah, it's funny because I was actually thinking about the farm set that we've got down there for the kids, which has got signposts in it,
true.
and wondering whether or not you
wonder what the scale is.
yeah.
But yeah, so...
You know what? There's some really big signposts.
So this is my main damage dealing unit. There's 6 picks so that they can mulch through squads. The 2 hammers and the 2 improvised weapons deal with big targets. And if I choose to cast Might from Beyond on them from the Primus...
mulching through squads just gives me really bad mental pictures.
So this is my hammer unit. With the Icon Ward nearby, they've got a 5+, Feel No Pain, rerolling 1s. They reduce damage taken by 1. They've got +1 to charge because of the Clamorous. If I can get Might from Beyond on them, they'll be strength 6 base with 6 attacks each. Like the stackability of them is pretty high.
Yeah.
And your opponent, or my opponent, has to fight them because you can't afford to let this unit wander around doing what it feels like.
Yeah.
So that's and that's probably where most of the meat that could be taken out of the army is. They're 260-ish points for the squad.
Yeah.
A little bit over that because the hammers are more expensive.
Yeah.
And there's 2 hammers there because I have to make the squad up of 10. There's 2 extra hammers. Yep. And if I were going to ditch those 2 guys, there's probably 70 points between those 2 models, and that would give me more points, but the hammers are actually useful in the squad, even though it's only a couple. So they're my 3 elites. My 4 troops, I have 3 units of 10 neophytes, with 2 grenade launchers in each squad.
How many, sorry?
3 units of 10.
3 units of 10.
Now, I was really pleased with this because I originally thought I only had 2 units of 10, and the 3rd unit had shotguns with 2 flamers, which are slightly more expensive. And then I realised that I still had a few bits on sprue, so I was kind of hoping to be able to swap the shotguns back to auto guns and, sort of make do with some conversions.
Yeah.
Only to discover that I hadn't built all the overkill neophytes from the box.
Perfect.
So I built another squad. So I now have 3 units of 10. And then I still have the other unit of 10 with shotguns, not in the army, and I have at least 10 more still on sprue to make mortar teams out of. So I'm kind of happy for the future of the army. I don't have to buy too much.
Yeah.
And then my 4th troop choice is a unit of 10 acolytes with 10 hand flamers and a single demo charge. The reason there is a single demo charge in there is I had 5 points left over when I wrote the army. And there's not
Whack it in there.
There's not that many options for me to actually spend on upgrades in some of these units. So I kind of went, you know what, this unit's going to be using lying in wait to deploy really close to use its hand flamers, which means it's going to be in range to throw a demo charge.
Yeah.
And if it hits nothing, it hits nothing. If it hits something, awesome.
Yeah.
But
it's 5 points if you had it left over.
Exactly, so I might as well use it.
Yeah.
And that model still gets his hand flamer, which means that once he's thrown his demo charge, if he survives, he's still got a hand flamer to use.
Yeah.
And they're only like 85 points for that squad. So I'm actually painting up that squad as 11 models, not 10, because the squad I built is 10 models with hand flamers. And then the demo charge guy I built ages ago, he's got demo charges in all 3 of his hands. So I don't want to cut him up to give him a hand flamer.
Yeah.
So as soon as I've thrown the demo charge, I'll literally swap that model out and put the other one in. So that way I know I've used the charge.
Yeah.
So that's...
And that's useful for your opponent as well.
Yeah, so they can keep track of me actually having used it.
Yeah.
It's not something I'll do every time, but like I say, I had 5 points left over and thought, why not?
Yeah, which is something else that we do talk about in the tournament prep guide, is using the points you've got efficiently.
Yeah.
So, you've got, it's 1,500 points, so you've used 1,495 points. You've got 5 left over.
Yeah.
So you've kind of adding something in because, well, I've got 5 points, what else are you going to do? Well, whereas we've seen other people come and they've used maybe 1,100 points.
And then they just load up on more gear.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I've still got 400 points. I could do something really useful with that, but I don't have the time. I don't have the money to go out and buy it. So instead, I'll just whack this war gear on there.
Yeah.
Which is possibly not the best use of points.
I did consider the other option I have at that moment is with that 5 points, I could have dropped 1 acolyte.
Yeah.
Which brings me back to 13 points left over, which then gives me the 12 points I need to give a familiar to the Magus so he can cast an extra power return.
Interesting thought.
It was one that I rolled around in my head for a long time and ended up sticking with
the acolyte.
The extra acolyte and the demo charge purely because I'm not convinced that the Magus will be around long enough to
use
to do more than what he's already going to do.
Yeah.
If he does, awesome. And look, maybe he will, maybe he won't.
But I guess at the end of the 4 games,
you'll
then have more information to be able to make a more informed decision.
I've got like
for the next
6. One. If you have a look over there, there's the little shorty ones.
I know what a familiar is.
Yeah. I've got 6 of them sat over there at the moment, all assembled. They're baby gene stealers, basically. Yeah. And
they're not the cute ones.
They are kind of cute.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they can be added at a later date. But at the moment, I've gone the way I've gone, and that's the way that it's going to be.
Yeah.
My 3 fast attack choices are 3 armored sentinels.
I like the familiar from the Biophagus best.
Oh, the one holding the beaker and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have that model.
Well, that's probably.
He was one that I did actually consider going and buying because I'm running 10 aberrants.
Yeah.
And then it had involved me probably ditching the Kellamorph, because the Kellamorph's 60 points, the Biophagus is only 35, but then I have to buy him the familiar. And then I'd have those other 5 points left over, which means I could then go back and give a familiar to the Magus, and then I've probably still got a few points left over. So you can shuffle it around all you like. The other problem is that because I've only got those 3 fast attack 3 elite choices, I could then move something to the Outrider, but then they're the wrong Hive Cult. So, and this is when you start mixing and matching Hive Cults, this is actually one of the problems you encounter, is that your buffs don't work across armies.
Yeah.
So, anyway, 3 fast attacker, 3 armored sentinels. They're Brood Brother sentinels with autocannons. I built them originally when this army didn't have the blip thing happening. They were built as scout sentinels.
Yeah.
So I went through my bits box, cut off all the sort of the wireframe scouty bits, and then replaced them with the armor panels. Deliberately haven't put the tops on the scouts, on the sentinels, so you can see the crew.
Yeah.
And that's because I converted the damn crew.
So you're going to see them.
So you're going to see the crew.
Yeah.
Because they were built as scout sentinels, so you could see the crew because they didn't have the armored top.
Yeah.
Now they've put the armored top on, I've gone, no, I want to make sure that you know that
I've actually
done the work.
For the conversions, yeah.
Rather than just sealing them up. They're there. Actually, they're actually my backfield objective scorers, because they're toughness 6 wounds, 3+ armor save, and they've got an autocannon with a 48-inch range. So I can plonk them on an objective. They're 40 points.
That'd be the technical term for that.
Plonk.
Plonk.
Yep. They're only 40 points each, so I can put them on an objective in the backfield, safe in the knowledge that the stray bolter shots or small arms is going to have very little impact on them. If I can get them a cover save, they're a 2+ armor save.
Yeah.
And if I can't, they're still 3+. And the chances of them being one shot with a las cannon or a heavy weapon, because they've got 6 wounds, the chances of them being one shot are actually reasonably low, because you need to roll 6 on the d6 for the damage.
Yeah.
So if you point a volcano cannon at them, then they're probably dead. But most of the standard heavy weapons that an army fields aren't going to one-shot them reliably. You're going to have to shoot them twice or 3 times.
Yeah.
So it just gives me a bit of staying power later in the game on my backfield objectives that they actually don't want to advance. They want to sit at the back and they just want to shoot every turn. And because they're Brood Brothers, there's no necessity to keep them near the Jackal. There's no necessity. There's a single model, so they can't fail leadership. So they're really self-sufficient units that can just stay wherever they are and just shoot.
Yeah.
And they're 3 autocannons, so they're a decent gun.
Yeah.
The last thing in the army is 3 Goliath trucks, which carry the 3 units of 10 neophytes most of the time. 72 points, double autocannon, and a heavy stubber each. So again, it's more mid-range, high rate of fire guns. The plan originally, because this is all Rusted Claw, the plan originally was to put the neophytes in those trucks and then deploy the trucks using blips.
Yeah. But
I've actually been thinking about it a bit more. Between the 3 trucks, the 3 Ridge Runners, and the 3 Sentinels plus the Jackal,
yes,
you're probably close on 750 points at that stage. And when you put things into Subterranean Assault, you can only put half of your points into ambush. So by looking at what can't ambush...
Is that what they said for the FAQ?
Yep.
The 50%? Okay.
So looking at what physically can't ambush... I've already spent 588 points on 9 models that literally are not allowed to Subterranean Assault.
Yeah.
The Jackal can, but if I put her in that pool of models that isn't, that gives me 658 points.
So you're only
I need
100
92 points on the table then literally the rest of the army can ambush.
Yeah.
As soon as I put those 3 squads of neophytes into those trucks, they're about 160 points between the 3 of them.
Yeah.
Which means the rest of the army gets to ambush.
Yeah.
If I'm playing an opponent who isn't Drakari with Agents of Vect, or who isn't Genestealer Cult with the Four-Armed Emperor Years in the Making stratagem, they're the only 2 stratagems in the game that can stop other stratagems.
Okay.
Which means that what I could do to tip this over is put a blip down for the Aberrants, who are 260 points.
Yep.
Which then means literally, including the Neophytes, everything else can ambush.
Yeah.
And then I can spend 1 CP at the start of the game to select blips to put them into Subterranean Assault, which means I can then move those Aberrants from the table back into Subterranean.
You're now at 8 CP.
Yeah, but that's still assuming I'm using, there's a lot of variables here.
You make that assumption, don't you?
The last one then gets spent on the extra blips. And that's my 9 done. But
is there anything else that you would use the CP
yeah,
for?
look, I mean, lying in wait's really good to use, but that's 2 CP. Chilling efficiency is, again, one that you may or may not need, depending on the target. And with reroll 1s, you might choose to not use it so often. And you'll want the rerolls every now and again as well. So that the 9 CP, Genestealers are hungry for CP.
Yeah.
So I'm just having to be a bit
frugal. That's I guess when we've been talking about it, we've kind of been going through and going, that's only 1 or 2 CP, that's only 1 or 2 CP. It adds up
super quick.
But yeah, so when I'm not just talking about this particular conversation, but when we were talking about it for episode 35, when we were doing the prep work for it, when we were talking about it for episode 38, when we're doing the prep work for it, and obviously talking about it in episode 35, episode 38, and now episode 39, there's lots where you go, it's only 1 CP. For 1 CP, this is great. For 1 CP, for 2 CP, that's 4 CP, that's a bit much.
Yep.
When you're working with a maximum of 12...
Maximum I could physically get in this army, in theory, at 1,500 points, it gets really tricky, but I reckon I could squeeze 16?
Oh, okay.
But then the problem with going that road is I can't get those Aberrants in. And part of the benefit of doing what I'm doing is to make those Aberrants super good.
And what makes them useful? What makes them super good?
It's to do with stacking the buffs that I have and then stacking them with, they're going to get an armor save because they're Rusted Claw. Most of the time with these sorts of units, you shoot them with anti-personnel fire because they're not super easy to kill, but they are easier to kill. So when you look at the Aberrant defensively, it's toughness 4, 2 wounds, and a 5-up save. Because it's Rusted Claw, it's 2 wounds, toughness 4, and a 4+ save, as long as I'm being shot with light weapons. And then it still gets its 5+ feel no pain after that, with reroll 1s, assuming the banner's nearby. And then it reduces the damage it actually takes by 1 on top of that, because of its Bestial Vigor rules. So you have to kind of stack them to make them work. Yeah. So
what I'm trying to pull into here is for the purposes of people who don't necessarily play this, or I guess I'm trying to pull into what's making you want to give up 7 CP in order to make sure that you've got these models on the table.
This unit is basically what carries the army in terms of damage output. The rest of it's pretty lightweight, and it's not that... it's cheap, but you know how you can have things that are cheap, good, and fast, and you can only pick 2 of those 3 things? Yeah, these are cheap and fast.
Yeah, okay.
So, whereas the Aberrants are...
Is there anything that's cheap and good?
Atalan Jackals, but they're not a model I have at the moment.
Okay, right.
And that's kind of part of the other issue with this army is it's what I own, not what I want to run necessarily. But yeah, the Aberrants essentially provide most of the heavy lifting for this army in terms of damage output, because they've got guns and they've got grenade launchers and they've got autocannons and mining lasers and all the rest of it. But I'm not going to outshoot anyone. So the Aberrants have to do work. They have to be thrown into the combat. They have to get in there and do harm. Yep. So if I really want to be a jerk, I can argue the rules as written from the FAQ, which would let me charge them with them turn 1. I'll actually have to talk to the TO about whether he's playing it as written or whether as intended. But because when you use the stratagem that lets you pull blips off the table and put them into subterranean assault, because they're specifically listed as being deployed on the table as a blip, the reserve rules that say you can't deep strike before turn 2 only apply to units that are deployed in reserve.
Yeah.
These units weren't; they were deployed on the table.
Yep.
So there's an argument for rules as written that what you'd actually do is you'd deploy the Clamavus. Oh, it's only 3 units. The Clamavus, the Aberrants, and then I can't decide whether it'd be the Icon Ward or the Primus. I'd probably be the Icon Ward.
Mm.
You deploy them as blips. You spend your 1 command point. You take all 3 of them off the table turn 1, and then at the end of your movement phase turn 1, you deep strike them, which means you can get a turn 1 charge off with them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the intent of what the FAQ wording has done. I think the intent is that they move into subterranean assaults, and then they follow the rules that everyone else has to follow.
Yeah.
But that's not what's been written. So for our events, if I was the TO, I'd be saying no. I would, at this particular case, I think the intent is this. And I would back that up by saying that there's not a single thing in the game that can do what you're describing, whereas you could do this potentially with 3 units of 20 acolytes.
Yeah.
So my argument would actually come from a place of looking at what is reasonable. As a player, I'm going to go and ask. Because if he says, yes, use it as written, I'm going to use it as written.
You're going to ask that before the event?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, and
because it's so not fair to ask that of him the morning of the event when he's trying to get everything set up and organised.
No, not at all. And yeah, I 100% agree. You have to be reasonable about it, because if I'm writing an army and the lists aren't due for submission at this point for about another week, it's not fair on me to wait until the nth hour before list submission and then go, hey, can I do this? And then he says no. And I go, well, now I have to change my whole army. And
well, then you should have been more proactive and asked this question beforehand.
Yeah. But you know what? Even if he says no, the army still works. So it's not going to change in my particular case. So yeah, the goal will be to essentially have just the vehicles and the jackal on the table for turn 1, which means that my opponent can't shoot the jackal, and then you're dealing with toughness 6, decent wounds and saves. So getting first strike actually becomes a bit tricky.
Yeah.
Some armies will just shrug and don't care because they'll have a knight or something that'll do it.
Yeah.
But getting it for assault,
Rory.
yeah, or Richard.
Well, Richard's army list isn't in there.
No, but he'll take a knight. It's Richard. It's going to have the Castellan. If he doesn't have the Castellan, well, I'll have words with him because
I'm going to message him now and say, don't put the Castellan in just to prove
just to prove me wrong. Look, if you want to do that and he doesn't, that's actually a good thing for me because I actually don't know how to kill the damn thing, other than with aberrants punching it.
Which is one of the other questions that I've got. Based on what you've got, how do you what's this going to work really well against, and what's it not going to work well against? The
2 biggest problems this army is going to have at 1,500 points is dealing with those big high toughness knights and the equivalents. And realistically, we're talking about knights because they're the most common thing in a tournament.
Yep.
That's toughness 8. Land Raiders and some of the other tanks get toughness 8. Lehman Russes, but the knights. The knight's efficiency against me is low because it's got really big guns that kill really big targets, and I've got nothing of significant value for it to kill. But at the same time, it puts out enough shots every turn that I do have to actually go and try and kill it.
Yeah.
So if it's one knight, I reckon I'm okay. Between the mining lasers, the aberrants, and the autocannons, and demo charge, and everything else, mind control or mental onslaught.
Yeah.
I reckon I can kill a knight. More than one knight is going to be...
You're going to struggle.
Is going to be a problem. Unless they're the baby knights. If they're the little Helverins and whatnot, they're only toughness 7.
Sorry, I just got the tune for Baby Shark. Baby Knight.
Baby Knight. Yeah. So yeah, those ones aren't so bad because the autocannons become effective and the grenade launchers start being okay, and the aberrants just make a mess of those little knights. But the big ones, yeah. 1's okay, 2's probably going to be an issue. The other issue, the biggest issue, more than a knight though, is flyers. Because none of my models have fly, which means I can't charge them, which is where most of the Gene Stealers stuff does its best work, is in combat. And the guns that I've got 9 autocannons and 3 heavy mining lasers, and 6 grenade launchers, and everything else is small arms.
Yeah.
Against flying monsters, it's not so bad because the Kellamorph works, the Jackal works, and generally the flying monsters aren't -1 to hit. But if I have to deal with an ALA-Tok Crimson Hunter Exarch who's already -2 to hit just straight off before I even do anything, and then they pop Lightning Reflexes, they're -3 to hit, and now most of my army can't even hit them.
Yeah.
The only upside to that is that the Crimson Hunter Exarch is only going to kill 2 to 4 models a turn, and nothing in my army is worth... The 200-point Exarch is going to kill 40 points or 50 points worth of stuff. So there is a balance there, but the fact that I can't just kill the rest of the Eldar and then have them count as tabled, because the acceptable casualties rules are in all these missions, means I can't just go for killing the infantry and then laughing as I table them. I actually now have to then play out the game with these flyers buzzing around. And to be fair, if all he's got left is flyers, he can't hold objectives with them. He or she. If my opponent only has flyers left, the most they can do is score line breaker at the end of the game.
Yeah.
At that point. If they then table me, as long as when they table me, I'm in front by at least 2,
you're all good.
The game ends, they get line breaker, and I win by 1.
Yeah.
So
yeah, okay.
So I don't know that's a good option.
No, I don't think it's a great plan, but I like that you've got a plan.
Yep.
What could you add, like if you were going to modify the army in order to,
to balance it
more? To balance that for the fly.
Part of it's 1,500 points.
Yeah.
Part of it is that. And part of it's to do with the fact I spent 400, 500, probably 500 points, just over, on the 10 Aberrants and the 3 Ridge Runners.
Yeah.
The Ridge Runners are 84 points each, and probably, in my opinion, 15 points each too much.
Yep.
If they were around that 70-point mark, even if they just reduced them to that flat total of 70, they'd be quite viable. As it stands, I can't... If I deploy them as blips, I don't get to use one of their special rules, which is Scout.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a rule that I'm paying for that I'm not actually getting to use. And they're kind of... They've got more wounds than a Sentinel, but they're not as tough as a Sentinel.
Yeah.
But they've got a weapon that's better than I can put on a Sentinel. So I'd like to see them come down a little, and that'd make them more viable to run in big numbers. But in reality, for me to deal with flyers better, the best option I have would be to probably ditch the whole Outrider, which is 300-ish points, and then go to the Astra Militarum book or the Tyrannid book and ally in something with fly.
Yeah.
Whether it's... I'd probably have to ditch the Aberrants as well, but if I ditched the Aberrants and the Outrider, I could put in an Air Wing from the Guard with 3 Punisher Vultures, or I could go to the Tyrannid book and go like a Flying Hive Tyrant and some troops to make a second battalion. And from a competitive point of view, both of those probably make a great deal of sense. But I don't own them.
Fair enough. I like what you've got.
Look, I actually explored both of those by going to people who play those armies and asking to borrow models.
Yeah.
But then I thought about it and went, you know what, that doesn't actually tell me anything about the cult army. It tells me about models that I know are good.
Yeah.
And how they work, or like I'm already familiar with them even though I don't play them.
Yeah.
This is an army that I've never seen anyone deploy Ridge Runners in the limited time the Cult Codex has been out. No one's run a big unit of Aberrants that I've seen, or trucks for that matter. So this is an army that's going to give me information.
Something a bit different.
And that information might be, oh my God, that was all shit. What have you done wrong? That at least gives me a starting point, a reference point.
Yep.
And then I can go on and go, okay, cool. You know what? I actually do need another 40 Acolytes.
Yeah. And I know I keep bringing back in the tournament prep guide, but we've been talking about it a lot recently.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we do talk about is that, don't write off an army based on the results of one game.
Yeah.
This will actually give you 4 games worth of information straight away. So you're able to then, generalize some of the information and tweak the army rather than just writing it off. And you can then hopefully get some learnings from it around what works well and what doesn't work well.
Yeah, and if I decide at the end of it, oh, you know what, I'm not going to run as many Neophytes next time, I want more Acolytes.
Yeah.
The 30 Neophytes that I've got will already have base colours on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll go trawling eBay or wherever to look for second-hand Acolytes rather than buying them new.
Yeah.
But it'll mean that I've now got a direction to take. That being said, my stubborn side still wants to take lots of vehicles and run them like I did my Dark Eldar, just because it's not the sort of convention that's being touted on the internet at the moment. And I definitely think there's a list there. What that list looks like, though, is hard to judge without playing games with it. And the problem is that it's really expensive to put the amount of trucks and vehicles I want on the table.
Yeah.
So it'd have to be proxy games to kind of play it out, to figure it out. The problem with that, of course, is you can only play your mates and
that's it.
whatnot with proxy models, because you're kind of fudging, like you're putting boxes on the table to represent the vehicles, and that's okay for playing at home, but you wouldn't want to, or you couldn't do it at a tournament. You wouldn't even want to do it at a store. So your data can be skewed because your opponents know what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So,
and also because you know your opponent's army quite well.
So, look, there's lots of ideas, but this is, I feel, a really good starting point. So
very quickly, because we have been jabbering on for a really long time, and just a shout out to Steve Dundas, because when I think I wrote something on Facebook saying that we're really trying to keep to
an hour and a half.
Well, an hour.
Yep.
And he was like, no,
3
run
hours.
it out to 3 hours. It's great.
This one could very well be.
Last episode, I think, will be around 2 hours. And this one
could easily be 3. Yeah. This might even have to be a 2-parter.
Yep. So this one's for
or
you,
at least
Steve.
or at least a 2-parter in that it's released on the same day, because the upload size might be too big for a 3-hour.
It might be.
Who knows?
But I mean,
we could
Jackie
do a 30.
And Sam are doing it, so then.
It depends on their hosting and everything. There's a few. Anyway, it'll either be episode 39 in one
A and episode 39B.
it could be a long A and B. We'll see.
Yeah. Anyway, so very quickly, what do you think it's going to do really well with? Where do you think its strengths are? How do you think it's going to go? Are there particular armies that this is going to go well against?
I don't think it's going to enjoy
those 3 questions in 5 minutes or less.
Okay. I don't think it's going to enjoy playing any form of Eldar.
Okay.
Primarily because the Eldar do what the Gene Stealers do, but more efficiently with less models. So I've already played.
Begs the question as to why you're running Gene Stealers and not Eldar, but that's probably a question for another day.
Look, I think I can, with this army specifically, I'm talking about. Okay. If I change the build up, I reckon I could beat Eldar and Drakari armies. Mm-hmm. With the army I'm taking, it's going to struggle against the typical Drakari and Eldar builds because of the nature of those armies. And I know that because I play them.
Yep.
And I reckon my 1,500 point Drakari army beats this army if played out the way I think they would both play out. I think this army does really well against things like Orcs, Tyranids, any of the Horde armies, because a lot of its weapons are really efficient, high volume type things. There's hand flamers, there's auto guns, there's grenade launchers, all the auto cannons are multi-shot, the mining lasers are all multi-shot, and everything has multiple attacks in combat. So it should do okay against Hordes. Against the really hyper elite small armies, it's actually a mixed bag, because those hyper elite armies want to face other hyper elite things, because they're paying a huge amount of points for single models to kill big tough things. So playing a Custodes army, for example, means that I'll be facing 20-ish models.
Yeah.
And if they're fielding a big mass of bikes, then I might have some problems, but I've still got vehicles, and they can't really do anything with those bolters. The vehicles will take some damage, and that'll be that. Mm-hmm. And then if he flies a Veritas Praetor captain on a bike over who's 240 points and guns down 10 neophytes worth 56, doesn't do anything for me. Like, there's so many small targets that the army can afford to lose stuff hand over fist and still function efficiently. Yeah. So, yeah, look, I think the fly armies are the biggest hurdle that I've got to try and figure out an answer for.
Okay. However, I didn't ask that. I asked, what do you think it's going to do well?
I did just say that, against Hordes primarily. Even standard sort of Space Marine armies, where you're paying a lot of points for benefits, like a 3+ armor save. My guns either give you the full armor save and I don't care, or they don't. Mm-hmm. So when I shoot the big guns at you, you're just not getting a save. A lot of my guns are also multi-damage, which means that things like Primaris Marines, who have 2 wounds each, which normally rely on the fact that most basic weapons are 1 damage. Auto cannons are 2 damage. The grenade launcher firing a crack grenade is multiple damage. Yeah. The mining lasers are multiple damage. All of the aberrants in close combat are multi-damage. They actually deal with Marines okay. So no, look, I'm reasonably confident I can deal with 60 to 70% of the field effectively, and then that other percentage is going to purely be driven on...
I hope that you don't have to play against them.
Matchup and the table and the deployment type. Yeah. The Gene Stealer cult's really well built to deal with Hammer and Anvil.
Yeah.
Because all of the stuff I'm putting on the table has a 48-inch range, so it doesn't care about closing to the center of the board.
Yeah.
And everything else is deep striking in.
Yeah.
So that actually doesn't bother me that much.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think all in all, I think if I can dodge, I'll probably end up having to deal with at least one Eldar player, and that's probably a loss depending on what they're playing.
Yeah.
But I feel like everything else, I've at least got a shot at messing with them and having a go at it.
Which is my next question. Do you think there's anything that people are going to be surprised at?
I think Ridge Runners are going to be, like, the internet just says they're garbage.
Yeah.
And I've deliberately gone, I really like the models, I need to try and find a way to make them work. They're not the most efficient. They need to come down in points, and I'm assuming that the next cycle of points changes will hopefully see that happen. If they don't, if they go up, then yeah, they'll have to come out of the list. But I definitely think putting them on the table would be, oh, aren't they cute? And then a few moments later, then they dump 9 las cannon shots into something. The cute factor will disappear, and they'll become a very high target priority very quickly, because you want to kill them. They produce so much of the heavy damage at range. So I'm sat here at the moment, though, going, how do I get a Nexus in the army?
At 1,500 points, I don't think you do.
Well, at that point, I'd have to drop 2 aberrants and then put the Nexus in. But then the Nexus would have to go into the Rusted Claw attachment, because then I get the benefits of the Primus and the Clamavus, which means that the Kelemorph would have to go into the Hive Cult, which is fine, because then falling back and charging with him is actually beneficial for him.
But what would the Nexus get you?
It gives me the CP regen, and this army is reasonably hungry for CP.
Yeah.
And it also lets me move a blip before the game starts. So for his 40 points, it's literally drop the demo charges and drop 1 hammer aberrant. And that would let me put him in the army.
Is it worth dropping an aberrant for that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Given that you've just said that the aberrant's the one that does all
all the work. Yeah.
And you've only got 10 of them.
Yeah. But this is kind of the conversation that's been going on in my head for a week now, trying to figure out the best course. How important is the CP regen? The answer is I don't know.
No.
The problem is I even converted that model.
Oh.
So he's built and undercoated and converted. He's just not in the army at the moment. So that could change. We'll see what happens before this submission, but that's probably the biggest question mark I've got at the moment. Although, if I dropped...
Oh, my goodness.
Well, if I dropped 2 aberrants with the hammers to bring it down to 8... and then get back that 5 points from the Flamer, that actually gets me another full squad of 10 Acolytes.
What do the Acolytes give you?
Well, at that point, instead of 1 squad of 10, I could go 2 squads of 5, which would then give me enough troops and enough HQs to turn the Outrider into a battalion. Because then I could move one of the I'd basically move the Magus over to where the Jackal is.
Yeah.
And then move the 3 units of... I'd probably move the 3 units of Neophytes and the 3 trucks over to the Hive Cult, because then there's units there that benefit from the Hive Cult rules. It also means the Jackal's auras affect them. And then at that point...
Have you changed this army list after we've just spent an hour talking
But this is what
about
happens,
it?
because now I'm sat there going, well, if I do that... then I'm actually better off not running Rusted Claw and run them as 4-armed Emperor, which gives those aberrants another +1 to charge when they land.
You have been banging on about how
I
amazing
know, but this
Rusted
is the
Claw
problem.
is.
This is the way my process works. So now I'm going to go and write another list, and
we should have
we'll see what
recorded
happens.
this next week, shouldn't we? 2 days before the actual event when the list was in.
Exactly. Anyway.
I'm not redoing it.
No. So on that note, we're going to end this topic. At this point, I'd say this is part A, and you'll have to listen to part B separately to see what the wrap-up is. But we might even release part A just before the event, and that way part B can come afterwards.
We'll see.
We'll see. It depends on how the edit goes.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll be back in just a second, one way or another, to either wrap up the episode or talk about part 2.
Yeah.
We'll see in a second. All right, part 2 is here. It's the day after the tournament.
The day after the day before.
I'm not following. It's too early on a Monday morning for that. So skulls for 2019, I suppose it's autumn skulls because they do now do an autumn and a spring because it's not 40k skulls anymore.
Well, there's no I suppose about it. That's what they actually called it.
Yeah.
It's Autumn Skulls Day 2.
Yes. Featured 40k, as it usually does and has done for the last few years in the format that Outpost run it in.
Mm-hmm. So I think we discussed in the last episode, so it was 40k, bolt action.
Well, it could also have been part 1 because we recorded part 1.
It doesn't matter. 40k, bolt action. What were the other two?
It was only 3. It was 40k bolt action and Kings of War.
Ah, yes.
So, looking around the room, I reckon they had 60 players in the room yesterday, maybe even 70.
So how many 40k players were there?
Well, there were 34 in down under pairings, and I think they had 32 finish.
Okay.
And bolt action, I think, was 20. It was either 24 or 26, and I think Kings of War had 10 or 12.
That's about 70 then.
Yeah.
72.
So that was really good, and we were very happy to support Skulls in regards to the extra boards and terrain they needed for 40k. It let them go from 20 players to
34.
I think they had 36 at one point, and they had a couple of drops, which is why we had 34. Still a great day out. 4 games, 1,500 points. Used the chapter-approved Eternal War missions. Those missions were Vital Intelligence.
We talked about that in the last part.
Just doing a quick recap for myself so I can remember the games themselves. Narrow the Search was the second mission. 4 Pillars was the third. And what was the last one called? It was Supplies from Above, I think it was. It's the objectives that move.
Sounds right. Yep.
Anyway, random matchups for round 1. 1,500 points, like I said. 2 detachments max. And the scoring side of things is something that we'll have to get into at the tail end of the conversation. But if you've listened to part 1 of this already, like you should have, you'll probably have realised that the army we talked about for an hour isn't the army I took. Because I had one of those epiphanous moments that saw me change my ideas at the last moment, which meant I had to paint the entire army in 9 days.
Yeah.
I got it down to about 20-ish minutes an infantry model by the time I'd finished it, and the vehicles were about an hour and a half a piece, give or take. Now, that doesn't include drying time for washes and varnishes and that sort of stuff as well, but that was what it worked out to be. So the squad of 10 neophytes was just shy of 2 hours if I sat down and just tried to smash through them. So the army got done. I finished it at 11 o'clock the night before the event.
Which is pretty good, really.
Yep. And to be fair, I could have taken it probably 2 hours prior to that, but I could have finished, 2 hours prior to that, but instead I loaded the car and sorted all the other bits and pieces to take to the tournament for the next day to help them out. So I loaded the car, got that all sorted, and then decided to put the texture paint on, which had always been the plan. But I went to bed that night without knowing how the texture paint had actually worked. Because that normally takes a couple of hours to dry, and I just went, you know what, it'll either crackle or it won't. That's the end of it.
Yep. And did it?
It did, for the most part.
See them.
No, for the most part it did. It didn't work well on everything because the texture paint I used, first of all, we meant to put it on really thick, and I didn't. And there are reasons for that.
Partly because you're going to snap them off those bases.
Yeah, they're coming off those bases, and then
there's no point putting a lot of time, energy, and money into doing them when you...
No, they're going to go on sculpted bases.
Yeah.
So I'm actually not going to bin those bases. I'm going to use them for undercoating other models. I'm going to use them for...
Yeah, but you're not using them, and they're not staying on that. So
I mean, they'll stay on it in the short term while I finish the other bases, and that way I can keep playing with the army as it stands. But the long-term life of that army is on different bases.
Yeah.
So finished it all up, went to bed, got about 6 hours sleep, which is pretty good for a pre-tournament event. I mean, it's more than we get when we run events.
It's more than I got.
Yeah, we did have a very rough night. So then on the way to the event the next day, they'd massively detoured. I was half an hour late because the detours they put in place for the main road I was using took me basically further south before I could go north again. So lots of fun.
And in case Michael, who was the TO, not this Michael, the other Michael, who was TOing the event, happens to be listening to this, he did actually leave on time to get there for the time that he had told you. So
yeah, And it was funny. Dan,
I will vouch for him for that. So he is notoriously late if he's not running the events, but he did leave on time, so it was the detour.
Dan Newton, who was part of the Bolt Action event, not running it, but he was playing. He lives out near us as well, and he had the same issue. He didn't know the detour had happened, so I'd actually already gotten there, done everything I needed to do, emptied the car, and I was parking as he got there, and he's there going, "Oh my God, like I'm so late because of these traffics." They'd literally closed off a big section of the road, so it made the day a bit later, a bit more stressful to start, I suppose. To give some post feedback for Mike Horton, who ran the event, it was a great day. Down under pairings went really well. There was one little niggle in the middle at the end of round one that I helped him resolve, but I had to actually call Diffie from Down Under Pairings to understand where the issue was. So that was all resolved really easily.
It does help when you've got the software developer on speed dial.
It does.
Speed dial even a thing these days?
Yeah, you've got favourites in your iPhone. But yeah, so that was the only issue that I saw for scoring. Mike had the rounds running on time. I think we actually finished the event on time. I know we started a tiny bit late.
Made up for it between rounds, I'm imagining.
Yeah, I think so. There were, the gap between round 1 and 2 was almost nothing from what I can gather. But we all got the 4 games in, which was great. My only other piece as a player, I felt like I was hassling him a little bit because I had no idea how much time we had, so I was constantly hollering for him to find out how much time we had left. And that's something that we're just as originally very guilty of, and then we've made an active effort, certainly in the last couple of years, to give everyone plenty of time warnings.
We do, but they still don't hear us.
No.
And I can go around to every single player, get them to look at me.
Yeah, and they don't take it in.
That there's 30 minutes left, and literally 3 minutes later they'll go, "Hey Emma, how long's left?"
Yeah.
I'm like, seriously? Literally 3 minutes from the last time I just told you?
Yeah. Now
you didn't tell me anything. No, I did.
So that was probably my only little piece of feedback for him, was giving us more heads up with like half time to go.
But does it not tell you on Down Under Pairings?
It does if you've got the suite open. The problem that, for me at least, when I got to the event, I only had about 60% charge in my phone.
Oh, okay.
And I kind of went, I don't want to leave it open for the whole...
And then not be able to score for the...
Yeah, so,
sure.
The phone just... I didn't want to take that gamble. So, I kind of fudged where I had a rough idea of how long I was taking to do things. But there was a couple of times there I'm hollering at him across the room, and I tried Michael. He didn't look up, and there's about 5 people in the room who were Michael. Mm-hmm. Then I tried Horton, and that didn't help either, because there were multiple Hortons in the room. So, but yeah, he did a really good job. I had a good day. The format itself was one that I suppose we can talk about in another episode, of scoring and all the rest of it as well.
Yeah, but right now the purpose of this was supposed to be to go through what you expected the army to do, and then how it actually performed. So based on what we spent an hour discussing, at the very end of that episode you were starting to go, oh, maybe I could, maybe. So do you want to start by telling us what the actual army list was?
Yeah, so it's still pure Gene Stealer Cult.
Mm-hmm.
It was a double battalion. The first battalion was Cult of the Four-Armed Emperor, and it was an Abominant, a Primus, and an Acolyte Icon Ward as the HQs. It was a Clamavus and a unit of 10 Aberrants with picks and 2 improvised weapons as a second elite choice. It had 3 troops choices, which was 2 units of 10 and 1 unit of 5 Acolytes with no upgrades. And that was about 720-ish points for that detachment. The second detachment was another battalion. This one was, the Cockcree was the Hive Cult. It had a Magus, a Jackal Alphys, who was the Warlord. And the Jackal Alphys in every game took the Hive Cult Warlord trait, which was reroll 1s for the shooting phase for friendly units within 6. And then I had 3 units of 10 Neophytes. 2 of them had 2 grenade launchers, and the third unit had 2 Webbers. The Webbers were in there because I didn't have enough points to give them grenade launchers, and in retrospect, for the 1 point they cost, they're actually really good guns. Then I had 3 Goliath trucks, and then I had 3 Achilles Ridge Runners with mining lasers and flare launchers as my 3 fast attack choices. So it was 1497 in total. It was only when I got to the tournament I realised that those remaining 3 points could have just been a hand flamer for each of the acolyte squads, like a 1 point on the squad leader.
Yeah.
So I could have used the whole 1,500.
Oh, for next time?
Well, I don't think it'll be a factor for next time
no.
because of the way I'd build the army differently in retrospect. But, so yeah, it was a double battalion. It had about 80 models in it.
Mm-hmm. So what did you see the benefits from what we just discussed in the last part, changing from that to what you actually took?
Well, the original plan was obviously a big rusted claw detachment to leverage the plus armor saves that the rusted claw would give to the neophytes and the acolytes. And in the end, trying to balance the way that you subtrain in assault versus the way you ambush with the blips is probably the hardest part, because you can only have half the units as a subtrain in assault. So when I kind of wrapped my head around that, I had to try and build the army slightly differently, because I have to be able to clear the screens as quickly as possible to then allow the subtrain and assault units to do what they do. So I essentially ended up building 2 mini armies, the first to accomplish clearing screens and supporting fire, and then the second detachment to do the heavy lifting and the assault side of things. And despite only winning one of my 4 games, the other 3 games were all games that I didn't actually feel like I couldn't win, and they're playing out the 2 that didn't complete. I definitely think I could have won those. Mm-hmm. And the one that I actually did lose at the bottom of turn 7, when I finally got tabled, I was winning in round 5 and round 6. So
you were really hoping you'd run out of time.
Yeah, I wanted that game to end.
You managed to make it all the way to the 7 turns.
Yeah. So the army functioned the way I intended it to. What was most interesting is the 4 matchups I got were all very, very different. And the fact the army competed with all 4 of them was probably a good sign. I didn't get to play a proper flyer army. In fact, the first game I played had flyers, and that was the one game I won. It had 2 Eldar flyers in it. None of the others did. So there's a couple of other games I'd like to play with the army in some iteration, just to kind of see how it would handle some of those. But yeah, I didn't feel like I ever didn't have the right weapons or have the right tools. It's the hardest part with playing it, because they're my first 4 games with this new codex, is deploying. So the army deployed 8 blips, and then I spent a CP at the start of every game to add 3 more blips to allow me to hedge my bets if I got seized on if I was going first, or give me some flexibility when I wasn't going first. And it meant that between spending that, upgrading the 4-armed Emperor detachment to an Anointed Throng, plus giving Field Commander to the Abominant, plus spending between 1 and 3 CP on extra relics, I often spent 6 out of my 13.
So I think that's actually one of the big differences between the way that you'd spoken about building the army and this. This did actually give you significantly more CP as well. Yeah,
this started with 13.
And that's because it started with the 2 battalions?
Yeah, the double battalion. Yeah. So they're 5 each, and then 3 for being battle forged, whereas the original plan was a battalion and a vanguard, which is 5 and 1, plus the 3 for battle forged.
Yeah.
And like I say, I burnt 3, 4, 5, 6, and then often when I revealed the blips, I burnt another one to move the Magus rather than deploying him, to move him to subterranean and assault. So I'd often spent half my CP before the game actually had even really gotten underway. So the army definitely wants CP.
Having said that, I think it's useful to note that if you'd taken that original army and you'd spent 7 CP by that point, you'd have nothing left for the rest of the game.
Basically, yeah. And I was out of...
You have to use those other 2 very, very carefully.
Well, I was out of CP in all but the last game by the time I hit turn 2.
Yeah.
By the time I'd finished my movement phase in turn 2, I was done.
And do you think that you used them wisely? Or do you think you blew through them a bit too quickly and could have been a bit more conservative? No.
I think... I finished the final game with 1 CP left, which was really interesting. But then again,
that was a waste.
We'd only had 3 turns as well,
okay,
so that's...
less of a waste then. So you only had 1 left for the remaining 4 turns, potentially.
Yeah, but I find that with command points, if you're not burning through them in the first 2 turns, it's an unusual game, because you need to use them to establish the game.
Yeah.
But the army essentially leveraged the relic sniper rifle on the Jackal to try and pop a mortal wound on anything that wasn't a vehicle, then or a Titanic, then spend 2 CP for chilling efficiency to give the friendly units within 6... friendly Hive Cult units +1 to hit that target, and then combine that with her +1 to hit, that she picks a target and everyone within 6 of her gets +1, and then you also have her reroll 1's aura. It meant that the Ridge Runners, if they didn't move, and the trucks, if they didn't move, were hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s against a specific target, which was... I only got to do once in the entire weekend, which was the final game, because game 1... I got to fire them once, but I failed to get... because the opponent I was playing was vehicles, I failed to get any sort of auto wound, which meant I had to try and inflict a wound before I could burn chilling efficiency. And by the time I got to that, it wasn't worth spending the 2 CP on. Game 2, which is probably the most interesting to talk about in a second, I didn't get to fire them other than on Overwatch, and then they all died. Game 3, I deployed them and they died, because a Knight Castellan looked at the 3 Ridge Runners.
Looked at them.
Yeah. And then Richard rolled some dice and then they all came off.
Yeah.
And then game 4 was actually when I actually got to do the plan with what I wanted to do with them. And they basically wiped out a squad of Gene Stealers because my opponent was a Tyranid player. So
they worked well the way you thought they would when you actually got the opportunity to do it.
Well, the 20 Gene Stealers, I think, are 240-ish points, and it cost me 250 in the vehicles plus the Jackal. But after they'd done that, even the following shooting phases where I get to continue firing, I was still putting wounds on Hive Tyrants and doing, killing Gaunts with so heavy stubbers, so I didn't miss chilling efficiency. So while it's nice to have up your sleeve for, you really want to hit on 2s, it's not a strategy I'd build an army around again, unless I was going to go just mining laser heavy and just swarm the board with as many mining lasers as I could to maximize the utility of that. So, and I've got a build in mind for that, and when I built the neophyte squads, there's actually about 8 mining lasers I've got on sprue for those infantry squads. So you'd have to build it. It becomes quite static, but you essentially build it with a Jackal in the middle to pick a target, and then you surround her with vehicles that can all see. So the truck's behind and the Ridge Runners in front, because one's smaller than the other.
Yeah.
And then you conga line out the infantry squad so that there's one within 6 of her, but then the mining lasers can be strung out, 20 models long and have them at the far end, and they're still getting the rerolls. Yeah. So I could definitely see trying to build that army, and I've got all the models for it. It's just a matter of, do I want to paint more neophytes?
Yeah, so that was a very big thing. You had wanted to put in as many neophytes as possible, and that very quickly changed to, oh my God, if I have to paint another neophyte.
It was the Acolytes that did me in.
Oh, that's right, it was, yeah.
It was the Acolytes that did me in. The neophytes weren't so bad. But the I actually used, on the Warhammer TV channel on YouTube, there's a how to paint battle-ready neophytes. And I used that as a basis for my plan to paint them.
Just change the colours slightly to have
I mucked about with the colours a little bit.
Yeah.
And, got them down to about 20 minutes ago to get a basic finished neophyte on the table. So the Acolytes I did exactly the same way, but of course there's all the chitin and much more exposed skin.
Yeah.
And it's Gene Stealer skin, not human skin, so they took a lot longer. And then...
they really don't look as good.
And then the Aberrants and the Abominants, which are mostly flesh... I thought, this will be easy. I'm painting flesh and then their pants. Yeah. And then I realised that they've got collars on and they've got all these chains on them, and you kind of have to be... it's a bit more difficult to do. You have to be more technical in your paint application, because otherwise you're either putting purple wash over the metals you've already finished, or you're trying to get a brush into these awkward spots to get the metals and the... After
the wash,
So it's... They took way longer than I thought, and I thought they were going to be an easy unit to paint. So they definitely took the longest. So we'll talk about the games.
Yeah, so you had obviously 4 games, and it was against 4 very different armies?
Yes, very, very different armies.
So the first game you finished, and that was it Craftworld?
So that was Dave, Sly Dave.
Actually going to use names, but okay.
No, I know all the guys' names, and I'm not going to...
I know that you know their names.
Dave and I had been talking about this particular game for the last couple of weeks since I settled on the army. And we'd both agreed, myself included, that if he went first, the chances are I was probably going to lose that game. As it stood, I got to go first. We finished with about 25 minutes to spare, and the game ended naturally at the bottom of 5.
Okay.
So Dave was running a Drakari Craftworld combo. I think technically on paper it's Craftworld because his Warlord was a Farseer. But it was a double Farseer. There was a Hemlock, a unit of Hornets, 2 units of Storm Guardians, a unit of Rangers, and then the Drakari was a triple Ravager Archon and a Razorwing Jet Fighter. And it basically epitomizes the army that I don't want to fight because it screens well. It's got the 2 units of 8 Storm Guardians plus the 2 planes that are great for screening out because I can't charge the planes. The Ravagers and the planes and the Hornets all put out a huge volume of fire, which means that my vehicles were not going to be lasting particularly long. And then when my infantry landed, they were essentially hitting on 3s, killing on 3s with every gun that he pointed at them.
Yeah.
So the game relied on me going first to have a decent shot at winning alongside the mission that we were playing. And then on top of that, getting the charges off and a few things going my way. The game ended up, finished the bottom of 5 with me up by 1 point, 16 to 15, which was really, really exciting because Dave's games and with me are always very close, and it's nice. The last time we played was actually down at Bunbury where he beat me by, it was only a point or 2, so it was nice to return the favour at another event.
Even if it was only by a point or 2, the same way.
So, it was 12-8 when we were in Bunbury because we obviously used the differential calculator. This was just raw score, so it would have been an 11-9 for me. So, a reasonably comparable result.
Yeah.
Dave screened really well, which made it really awkward for me to utilise what I needed to do. And once I'd figured that out, I just decided to go all in on turn 2 rather than trying to clear the screen turn 2 and then drop in turn 3. And that probably did me a service because it meant that with the Abominant, the Aberrants, all of the cult, the Four-Armed Emperor deploying, he'd only killed, I think it was 2 of the Ridge Runners.
Yeah.
And so if he was trying to kill the other vehicles, which were shooting autocannons and mining lasers, he wasn't killing the Aberrants and the Cultists, which were the ones that were scoring points and hurting him up close. So by overwhelming him, I kind of kept him out of the game enough that I could keep scoring points every turn. And then as we got sort of into turn 4, I'd killed the Ravagers, the Razorwing was dead, I'd killed all the Storm Guardians. Like, Dave didn't have too much left, but at the same time, I was, at that point, hanging on because all of my assaults had happened. I'd killed what I could kill. It was all dead. And I had a couple of trucks left over just sort of holding out. But they were both holding out on critical objectives, which meant I was still scoring points. So, turn 6, I don't think he would have tabled me turn 6. He certainly would have turn 7, almost certainly. But if the game had gone to turn 6, it probably would have resulted in a draw because I was still scoring points that turn.
Yeah.
And then turn 7 would have seen. So, really close game. And it was exactly what happened in Bunbury. It was a really close game where I was still scoring points and he just held me off until the game ended, which was turn 5 in then as well. So, yeah, that was proof of concept. The army did roughly what I expected it to do. And it was only a minor win. Yeah. But it was a win.
It was still a win.
Yeah.
The second game, it's a bit tricky to kind of, with the second game, to count this towards your feasibility study for the army because obviously it didn't finish.
No.
You turns?
Turn 3, I think it was.
Okay. And so what was this army that you were playing against?
Dean was playing Gene Stella Cult.
Oh, yep.
So it was a cult off, which... So because we were playing the core Eternal War missions, this particular mission was the Narrow the Search. So it's a single objective in the middle of the board.
Yes.
With the no invulnerable saves, which neither of us cared about because none of us had involves.
Yeah. So that actually probably worked out the best that it possibly could for you.
Well, he had 2 models that had involves, but neither of them dropped near the objective when they did deep strike in. And yeah, I don't have any, so it doesn't bother me in the slightest. that game, you could only score 1 point a turn. And it was literally, on turn 1, it's who has the most models within 18 of the objective. And then it's within 15 of the objective, then within 12 of the objective, and so on. Now, Dean was running a mass infantry spam, so I think he had 100 bodies. I only had about 70, I think it was, in infantry. And I got to choose who went first and second. And the problem I had with this was, if I went first, then that's great, because it means that I can deep strike in my units and I can kind of, have a bit of control over the middle parts of the game.
Yeah.
It also gives me a chance to get all my guns firing turn 1 to the units he has to deploy and try and kill some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If I go second, I'm safe for turn 1 because he had almost no range firepower. He had a handful of... it was a brigade. So it was a Primus, an Icon Ward, a Patriarch. Then it was a Clambervus, a Nexus, and a Kellamorph for the elites. And then it was 20 Brood Brothers. And then it must have been a unit of 10 Acolytes and then 4 units of 20 or something. Like, there were 4 big units of Acolytes.
Yeah.
3 Armoured Sentinels with multi-lasers, and then 3 Brood Brother heavy weapon teams with mortars and heavy bolters. Mm. So he had more command points than me. He had more bodies than me, but he had very little in the way of guns, which meant that...
Did you say somewhat important?
Well, it's an awkward one because he wants to get up close and do all his work. So what it meant for me was making that call as to, do I want him to drop before me to give me a chance to respond, and risking him dropping and pushing me hard enough that I couldn't recover from? Or do I go first and try and control the flow of the game?
Yeah.
So in the end, I elected to go first, and by using blips and whatnot, he essentially meant the only shooting I did was with my twin autocannon trucks. And I did get some heavy stubber fire in as well, and I got first strike out of it. I killed a unit of mortars, I did some damage on some sentinels, and basically did not much else. So I got first strike. He scored the point round 1 because he had a unit of 20 Brood Brothers within 18 of the objective, and I had 8 models because the infantry inside the models don't count.
Yeah.
If I deployed them, then it would have given me that 1 point.
Yeah.
And what I should have done is actually deployed those infantry, pushed into the middle, scored that point, and then in turn 2 just gotten back in the trucks. So that's just a mistake I made with the mission specifically. Then he kind of did very little because he couldn't. He hid. My turn 2...
Completely legitimate tactic.
Yep. My turn 2, I dropped in my unit of 5 Acolytes and a unit of 10 Acolytes. And then chose to hold everything else for turn 3. The 5 Acolytes I put in just to basically put a screen behind my army so he couldn't charge my character, like my Jackal and my vehicles, from behind easily. And the unit of 10 was dropped in to actually try and clear that Brood Brother squad. And then they failed their charge and they died in his turn 2. The charges that he made turn 2 killed 2 of my trucks and a Ridge Runner. But what was really interesting is one of the trucks exploded, did damage to his squads, and then when he piled into the neophytes then got to fight. And one of the biggest things about the Acolytes is they're basically Gene Stealers when they attack, but only Guardsmen when they defend. So all of a sudden, my basic Guardsmen are attacking his basic Guardsmen, and I killed handfuls of them with just neophytes, which both of us were kind of like, oh, hang on.
Wasn't expecting that.
And then because my infantry, my neophytes were Hive Cult, when I got to do my turn 3, they all got to fall back, and they could still shoot because the Hive trait lets them do that. So it was quite interesting to see how effective that was with those trucks, where the trucks gave them a layer of durability. They got out, they got to shoot, albeit with the -1. But because of the Webbers being auto-hit, which I didn't realise, Dean actually said to me, they're auto-hit, right? And I went, no, they're not. And then I looked up the codex and went, oh, they are. For 1 point, that's friggin' cool. I need to get more of these.
Well, that was incredibly good of him to share that.
Yeah. I dropped in the Abominant, the Aberrants, all the characters. Dean had screened really well. Not necessarily screened, but he'd the way he'd attacked me around the centre objective meant that I had a really awkward deployment. And then proceeded to fail every one of the charges, with +3 in most cases. And and with a reroll on top of it. The only one that actually made it in was the my Abominant, and my Abominant for the entire weekend, whenever he fought with his 3 attacks, only ever got 1 hit. Like, consistently was 1 hit.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, the hit he landed was against the Icon Ward, which for a Gene Stellar Cold Army gives the rerolls to leadership. It gives a whole bunch of buffs and benefits. So I splattered him with a Power Sledgehammer, which removed the Feel No Pain from all the acolytes that were holding the center objective, which meant that now when he charged me the next time, all my Overwatch was actually really effective because he didn't have Feel No Pain. And then when I got to fight back, I actually was killing things even more efficiently.
Yeah.
And then the game ended. He put in more units, like he deep struck in more units, and that was that.
Yeah.
And I feel like going into turn 4, I'd basically cleared his backfield. He had a couple of Sentinels on 1 wound, and that was it. And I had the ability to cast Might from Beyond on the Aberrant unit, unopposed, because the Patriarch was nowhere nearby, which would have left me in a position to charge those 10 Aberrants plus the Abominant with no Overwatch into the 2 big blobs he just dropped in the middle of the board. And those Aberrants would have just... Like, there were 40 models for them to kill, and the unit would have been hitting on 2s, wounding on 2s, with no saves, and about 60 attacks. So clearing those 40 guys is entirely possible. And the fact that he had no CP left to make them auto-pass morale, I only had to kill half of them for them to automatically fail morale anyway. So the chances of me clearing the center of the board with those Aberrants was entirely likely, which in turn means for his turn 4, obviously at that point I've had to fall back with more vehicles to complete that. He's then either got to come to the Aberrants with 20 Acolytes versus 10 Aberrants and fight them one-on-one, which doesn't end well, or he gives me the center objective. And I feel like as that game would wear on, if I don't table him turn 5, I'm not far off tabling him turn 5, and then certainly by 7, I reckon I table him. So it was disappointing to only get 3 turns. It would have been a very close game regardless.
But it would have been nice to get to the end to find out.
To actually see if my theories were correct. So, that was... it was interesting, though, because the 2 armies that I played that were similar in model count to me only got to 3, whereas the 2 armies that were slightly lower in model count, because my third game was against Guard with Knights, we finished naturally.
So do you think that... So it's interesting because I know who you played for game 1 and I know who you played for game 3, and obviously you're going to share that in a minute. But they're quite experienced players, they're veteran players. Do you think that the low model count was what happened, was what played a part in those games finishing compared to the other 2? Do you think that because they're experienced players and you weren't experienced with this particular army, they carried you? Do you think that it was the difference between having... two experienced players, as in yourself and your opponent, who are relatively experienced, well, not relatively, who are experienced players, that's what made the difference for those 2 to finish? Or did you think it was the missions?
No, look, the 2... So game 3 was against Richard, who is a regular and has been since day 1 for us in terms of helping with terrain and...
I know. So just to interrupt here... So spoke to Mike on the phone because I'd managed to lock myself out of the house, which was quite frustrating. And so I rang him to let him know and to find out if he had any suggestions, which he didn't. But anyway, and so he was winning at the time that I called him. He was playing against Richard and he was winning. Called back. No, actually, he sent me a text message and said, I just lost against Richard. So I called him and said, what? What happened? And then he said, I've just fired him. What do you mean you've just fired him? I told him that if I lost, that he was fired from OPSEC. I'm like, no. I think if you lose, then he has to do twice as much terrain, not stop.
So, he agreed to that.
I think that's great. I'll be getting some terrain material to you, Richard.
So game 3 was Richard. He was running a guard...
Can I just interrupt for a minute? Just for people listening, we have 3 children home today who are all unwell. So we had to get this recorded because we've got meetings all day for Wednesday, so we've got no other time to record. So we're doing it with 3 kids home.
Yep. So I'll do my best with the edits, but
Yes.
we'll see what happens. Game 3 was Richards with the Loyal 32, so 3 units of 10 guardsmen, 2 company commanders. He also had 2 teams of 3 mortars in that detachment and 5 slab shield ogrons. He had a super heavy detachment, which was, I think it was House Raven Knights, so it was a Castellan and 2 Helverins, and then he had 80 points put aside for an assassin. He chose the Eversor assassin against me. Because he likes to prove a point. I killed it without it doing a thing.
That must have felt really good.
No, when he looked at my army and ummed and ahed about it, I said, look, don't take the Vindicare. It's pointless because I can hand hits off to friendly models. So there's not a lot of point in the Vindicare against Genestealer Cult. It can work, but it's not nowhere near as good as it should be. He toyed with the idea of the Calexis to stop my Magus, but ultimately I've got 1 Psych who casts 1 power a turn. It's a kind of a waste of 80 points, which leaves him with the Eversor or the Calidus.
And he wasn't taking the Calidus.
And he wasn't going to take the Calidus, I don't think, because of me. Whereas if it was me, I would have 100% done it because of her ability to make me spend more CP on all of those things that I do at the start of the game, which would have meant that I couldn't have perfect ambushed later in the game, which meant I couldn't have used lying in wait. Like there was a whole bunch of stuff later in the game that would have essentially not been possible.
Yeah.
Whereas he chose to deploy the Eversor rather than deep strike him, ran him around a bit on the board. He ended up high and dry with nothing to fight, and then I just shot him to bits and he died.
No, that's a bit sad.
So he did affect the way I had to deploy and move, because I was essentially kiting him trying to avoid getting charged. But at the same time, if he'd taken the Calidus, that ability to then spend some CP to have it run for turn 1 and turn 2 would have just neutered my army. It would have cost me a lot of extra CP, which essentially limits more, how much I can actually do.
Yeah.
So that definitely would have been my choice, but he had his own reasoning. I was winning at the end of turn 5, I was winning at the end of turn 6, and then he tabled me turn 7, and it was a 6-point swing back in his favour, so he won at the bottom of 7. He made a critical mistake in turn 3, which essentially let me drop my big combat unit of Aberrants right in the heart of his army with a nice little 9-inch space, which let me charge and essentially kill all of his scoring units by turn 3. So I was scoring points in turns 4, 5, and 6 with my own scoring units where he wasn't able to.
Yeah.
So I ignored the Knights for basically the whole game and just focused on how do I score points and how do I stop you scoring points, and that seemed to work pretty well.
That kind of does seem the crux of the game, to be honest.
Yeah, but because this particular mission only lets troops score, I out-trooped him for a start. He only had 30. I had 60. And my 60 weren't on the table for him to attack from turn 1, whereas his 30 were.
Yeah.
So I managed to basically when the Aberrants got their charge off in turn 3, before we scored that turn, they went in and just literally took out his entire troops detachment in 1 round of combat. I should point out I did drop them turn 3 because I didn't have a good space for them in turn 2, and I did lose all 3 of the Ridge Runners instantly turn 1. And I think I took 3 wounds on the Jackal turn 1 as well from a missile that came in from the Castellan, which was a bit unnerving. But that final turn 7, saw him remove my line breaker, and then he also picked up line breaker in that same phase. He got Slay the Warlord that phase, he got Kill More Units that phase, and then he got 3 more points for tabling me that phase as well, based on the event pack. So it was 6 points for him, and it cost me 1, so it was literally a 7-point swing in that turn 7 that went from me up by 1 to him winning by 6.
Yeah.
So, it's full credit to him for clawing it back. I was sat there at the end of 5 going, game end. End of turn 6. Freaking end. Oh, turn 7.
Shame.
Yeah. But you know what? It was a really good game, and I
always find it more exciting when games go to the wire.
Well, it meant like I say, he gave me an opening he made a long charge with those Ogrins that I was actually hoping he would make. It was a 10-inch charge, and I'm there going, I didn't put them close enough. Hoping that he would take the charge that I wanted him to and sacrifice a unit of 35-point acolytes in order to create the hole I wanted.
Yeah.
So they went one way, the Eversaw went the other way, and then the guardsmen all fired at the acolyte unit that the assassin was going to charge and killed them all. And I went, that assassin's... if the assassin would have made the charge, which would have let me drop in that gap.
Yeah. But
now there's no gap. And then the Bulgarins made a long charge and gave me the gap on the other side.
Yeah.
So I was very thankful for that. It let me stay in that game, and it kept me in the game all the way through. After the Aberrants dropped and killed 30 guardsmen in a round of combat with change, I ended up with 3 alive after the fire from the Castellan and the Helverins and everything going, oh crap, those things need to die.
Yeah.
I rolled a 1 on their leadership test, so they actually stayed, like I had my 2 hypermorphs, which are the important ones, and they went on to kill a squad of mortars and the last company commander by themselves. And then the knights went, okay, there's only a couple of them left now, and nuked them in the following turn. But those Aberrants took a huge amount of killing. They were really... Every game, they were so hard to put down. Like, with Dave in game 1, they took his entire army's worth of firepower and then still made combat again before they went down. I lost to Richard by, in the end, a 6-point differential, which in...
No, not differential. You lost by 6 points.
It was a 6-point swing. So that'd be...
I guess I don't like using the word differential because I always associate that with the scoring method that we use.
Yeah. I think it'd be a 14-6 or a 13-7 for him.
Yeah. Based
on the differential. And then the game against Dean was, I think it was 2-5 at the bottom of 3. So again, it would have been like a 12-8.
Yeah.
If you scored it at that moment.
Mm-hmm. And then the final game was...
Tyranids. Felix with his Tyranids. He was running... it was a single battalion. And it was a really weird build for me because it felt really small. It wasn't. There was still 80 models in the army. There was a Flying Hive Tyrant, the Swarm Lord, 5 Hive Guard, 3 Tyranid Warriors, 22 Termagants, half of which had Devourers, and then 2 units of 20 Gene Stealers. And
again, it's somewhat difficult to say how the Gene Stealers went against them because you only got
3 turns.
3 turns in.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to kind of go, oh, well, this is where the weaknesses were against this, or this is where this went really well because you didn't get there.
No. I mean, on paper, I lost that game to Felix. He had more points than I did at the end of turn 3. However, that game, chilling efficiency worked in turn 1. And I got to nuke almost an entire squad of Gene Stealers in the opening salvo. And when I dropped in with the Aberrants and the Abominant and everyone, the major charges I needed to make, I made. So the 2 Hypermorphs and the Abominant killed all 5 Hive Guard in 1 round of combat without taking a hit in return. And I killed half of the Termagaunts with the 3 or 4 Aberrants that I actually made contact with the Termagaunt brood. And Felix wisely removed all of the ones that would have locked that unit in combat, which meant that the Devil Gaunts in his turn, when it came to his assault phase, in my turn, he couldn't activate them because they weren't within 1 to fight.
Yeah.
Which meant in his turn, they were free to do what they liked. So he was very clever in doing that. But when he started shooting at the Aberrants, he very quickly realized it was just a pointless exercise with Devourers because they were just too durable. They were in cover at that point within range of the banners. They were wounding on 4s. So he's hitting on 4s, wounding on 4s, and then I've got a 4+ save, and then I've got a 5+ feel no pain with a reroll. So firing 30 shots, he's getting 15 hits, he's getting 7 wounds, I'm saving 3 or 4 of them, and then I'm saving 2 or 3 of the remaining.
Yeah.
So he's doing a wound here and there, and it was, okay, I'm not killing those. And they essentially dominated the backfield. They wiped out everything they touched. So at the bottom of 3, he had the Winged Hive Tyrant was on 6 wounds, but he just killed my Warlord. The Carnifex, he had a Carnifex with Quad Devourers as well in the list. That was the other monster. So he had that left unharmed. He had 5 Gene Stealers and the Swarm Lord half dead as well. And I still had my full unit of Aberrants the Abominant, the Primus, the Magus, the Clamavus, the Icon Ward. I still had 10 Acolytes in Deep Strike. I'd used Return to the Shadows on them in turn 3, assuming we'd get turn 4, because at the time we would have. And then 5 minutes later, the TO's come around and gone, last dice. And it was like, oh, okay. Not that it mattered in this game, because there was no points for units being destroyed off the table. So what it meant for me in turn, because I went first that game, my turn 4, the Aberrant unit with the Abominant and all the characters was about 9 inches away from the Carnifex and about 11 from the remains of the Gene Stealers. So, and the Abominant and the Aberrants all had +3 to their charges. They would have had +2, sorry, because of it wasn't the turn they deployed, but they still got +1 for the Warlord trait and +1 for the Clamavus.
Yeah.
So, and I still had a CP left at that stage. So getting a charge off with the Aberrants and the Abominant was pretty reasonable. 7 on 2 dice with a reroll, and that there's pretty good odds at that point.
Yeah.
And I still had the 10 Acolytes and the Magus to kill the Flying Hive Tyrant. I still had Smite up my sleeve, and 10 Acolytes against the Wounded Hive Tyrant was a reasonable shot at doing enough harm after Smite from the Magus to actually kill it, which means going into his turn 4, I would then hold 3 of the 4 objectives. He would hold 1 with the Swarmlord. The Swarmlord would be half dead at that point, because I fully expect the Abominant and the Aberrants to kill the Carnifex.
Yeah.
Everything they touched in the game was just melted before them. So I certainly wasn't expecting that to be an issue. Which meant the Swarmlord either had to run away and leave the objective, because if he stayed on the objective, turn 5, I charged him. So he was going to have to move 9 inches away from the objective and then probably use his ability to double move to clear, to make sure I couldn't charge him in turn 5. But in doing so would actually give me all 4 objectives in turn 5, which meant that in his turn 5, he's scoring nothing, and then he's only got 2 choices. He either has to come back towards me and hope turn 6 and then fight me, which isn't good for him, or he runs away more and I score more points and the game becomes a blowout. Yeah. So I do feel like that last game was one that, again, going to time, I probably win. Yeah. So, although it was funny when we got to the table, because my army is obviously more traditional Gene Stealer colours in purples and blues. Yeah. His army of Gene Stealers was more, I suppose, natural base, so it was browns and yellows and stuff. Oh. So I like to think that the cult uprisings happen, the Gene Stealers and the Tyranids are coming, all these Tyranids land on the planet, and the cult goes, you guys are the wrong colour. Like, where are my purple and... You're not my gods. You're not purple and blue. So that was the conversation that took place on the table.
I like that you've created a backstory.
We thought it was great.
Well, I've created an entire story in my head just based on that one thing. Yeah. So, yeah.
So, although the quote of the day has to go to Ryan Buck from the Toy Soldier Cartel, was playing Travis, also of the TSC. And Travis was running a gimmick army. It was basically 4 Greater Demons and a Knight. And they're playing in round 5. He means
that with affection, Travis. He's not as insulting as it sounds when...
Travis knew it was an interesting army. But I heard over from the table beside us, Travis, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but no, you're not getting cover for that Bloodthirster. Because Travis was trying to wedge this Bloodthirster into a building with its huge wings and everything like that, and Ryan's just going, no. Nice try, but no. Yeah. So, and that game actually got Ryan the win in the final round. Nice. So, so all 4 of the games, game 1, like I say, I won, and it was always going to be a close game. If Dave went first, I feel like it wouldn't have been. I feel like Dave probably would have won that in a much more significant manner.
So if we look at the goals that you had for the day, your goal was to win 2 games.
Yeah, I didn't do that.
You didn't do that? No, you didn't. I guess the game, it's so funny because the game could have gone either way against Dave, depending on who'd gone first, and the game could have gone either way depending on whether, with Richard, depending on whether it finished in turn 5 or...
Well, if I'd gone first with Richard, because he went first in that game, that changes the whole play of the game. Yeah. Because the way I deployed the blips meant that if I got to seize, because I knew he was going first, if I'd seized, I'd actually put 4 blips to let me deploy all the mining lasers and stuff on a different flank, which allowed me to then pop all the strats and combo it off and try and kill, like, either damage the Castellan or kill one of the Helverins and kill a bunch of the infantry before they even score.
Yeah. I feel like that those two games, you're kind of showing that the army works the way that you thought it would.
Yeah.
The other two games, do you think that you have enough information to make a call based on the amount of turns that were played?
Like I say, I actually chatted to Felix at length for at the end of game 4, sort of explaining my reasoning, because like I said to him, like, I'm happy to, like, we got told it was last dice as we're about to start turn 4, and I went, look, let's just call it there. There's no point in me like moving and doing a handful of things then you not getting a turn.
Yeah, that's not fair.
And he went, oh, you sure? And I went, yeah, look, you know.
I really like that. It shows integrity.
It was one of those ones where I knew I would need at least 5 turns to win the game, and that was never going to happen in the time we had. So it was in my mind, it was much easier. You know what? In the time we've got left, there's nothing I can do about that.
Well, I think that in the time that you have left, it's unfair for one player to have their turn 4 and the other player not to.
Yeah. So I decided to go, you know what? We'll just call it there. I think it was 5-2 or something like that. 6-3 wasn't a huge thing. So we talked about it at length, and he said, "Oh, well, you're not going to kill the Swarmlord because I just doubled move him away." I went, "Well, that's fine, but it means that you're not scoring anything, but I am, and the points, turn 4 the points narrow considerably, and then turn 5, they're gone at that point." And you have to stay away from me or I table you. And he went, yeah, look, I'd be interested in playing this out. I said, yeah, I would as well. And I think it'd be a very close run thing because there's Overwatch to factor in. And if I fluff the combat, then, there's, I still have to kill the Flying Hive Tyrant, which is, again, not a done deal. But we sort of talked that through and went, yeah, look, the game would end close if we played it out to conclusion. So it was certainly a game I could definitely have won. Whereas game 2 with Dean was a bit more murky because the combats weren't going to be... They were going to be decisive, but they weren't going to be as clear-cut in the results.
Yep, sure.
So, yeah.
Your other goal was to get, I think, 15 for painting?
Yep. And Mike was clearly more generous.
Very generous with his scoring. Yep.
Because I think I ended up with 20... I think he told me 23.
Yeah.
So... I wasn't expecting the finished army tick box on his list, which he gave me. And I kind of went, oh, wow. And he went, well, it looks finished to me.
That's it. And that's the difference between, and I know I keep going back to different things, but when we look at painted armies, when you've got one character that's been painted to this really high standard and your other everything else everything else is kind of painted to just above tabletop standard, it stands out that, this is either not finished or but when you sort of gradually bring everything up together, it looks uniform. So it looks finished even though it's really not finished.
No, it wasn't really finished. And look, he actually picked models up and went over the army and had a look at them.
I'm guessing you didn't pick any up that had the unpainted tongues. Because and the reason that I say that is because one of the tick boxes that you got was for details being completed.
Yeah, so I'd painted in pouches and like the demo charges and the blasting charges on the models, and I'd painted in like the piping on the respirators and that sort of stuff.
But I hadn't done
the tongues on the aberrants and a few of the acolytes and whatnot. So I definitely think that I was fortunate to have a fairly generous scoring there. Like if it had been me, I went through what I thought it would score, so I was certainly a harsher critic than he was. But that was nice.
Yeah. And looking at the information that you got from the 4 games that you did play, do you have enough information to work out whether or not you'd make changes before you... And I know that you had every intention that this wasn't how the army was going to stay. However, if you hadn't gone in intending to change it, would you make changes?
Probably, but then there's nothing significant that I would change because the army actually worked the way I expected it to. It did what I thought it would do, and it layered the way I thought it would. I feel like if you're going to try and run this style of army, you're actually better off trying to load the deep strike more. Mine was a 50-50 split, and I feel like it would have been more advantageous to probably go 70-30 and use the stratagem to pull units from the table into deep strike, because the 3 trucks and the three ridge runners did pretty well.
Yeah.
But for the price of the ridge runners, I think they're 10 or 12 more points than a truck. So I could have basically dropped the 3 ridge runners for 2 more trucks, and the points from the 3rd ridge runner almost buys me enough models to fill those 2 trucks.
Yeah.
And it'd basically be swapping 6 heavy stubbers and 3 heavy mining lasers for 2 heavy stubbers and 4 autocannons. So the net result's pretty close. But you're also then picking up the extra 16 autoguns, the extra 20 wounds, and then probably Weber's or grenade launchers as well. So the net result's probably more efficient in that format. Yeah. And the trucks are harder to kill. Because the ridge runners on paper, I went, they're 8 wounds, toughness 5, 4 up armor, 6 up feel no pain. Like there's a whole bunch of things to like about them. They're a low profile, so they hide really well. Yeah. Anytime someone pointed anything remotely dangerous at them, they just died. Yeah. They died like seriously quickly. Whereas the trucks with those couple of extra wounds and the extra point of toughness meant that they didn't die as easily. So yeah, it was interesting to see that firsthand. So I'd probably look at doing something like that. I also feel like the aberrants are in an awkward spot because I want 2 hypermorphs. Those things are just horrifically efficient. 6 attacks each minimum at strength 10, -1 and flat damage means that they just mop up units. But you can only have 1 for every 5 in the squad, which means you have to then drop 125 points on a squad of 5 to get 1 hypermorph, or 250 to get the 2. So I probably would have been better off ditching that 250 point unit entirely, ditching the Abominant as well. He's another 105 points, and those 365 points or whatever it works out to be in Acolytes would have been another nearly 60 bodies. Yeah. And even with no upgrades. And at that point, you wouldn't. You'd probably go 50 bodies and hand out icons and other bits and pieces so that my army loses 20 wounds and 10 guys, but it picks up 50 models, which is 150 attacks. Or, there's a whole bunch of benefits to doing that.
Yeah, sure.
But again, based on the time I had, the models I owned, and what I actually wanted to do with the army, the decision that I made, I was happy with. Like I've had a few people go, aberrants are garbage, but I really loved them. Yeah. So much so, I actually have 20 aberrants. There's another 10 that are all assembled and ready for paint. And I actually want to try an army with 30 because that's the maximum I can have. Yeah. And 30 of them plus an Abominant is 850. There'll be some hammers, so it's probably 950, but call it 1,000 points by the time you put the icon in there as well, because you want the icon. Yeah. And a Clamavis as well.
Of course.
So it's about 1,000 points, but my God, that will hit like a freight train, and killing 10 of them was hard enough. Yeah. Killing 30 will be a real problem for some armies because they just don't die. Like Dave's Disintegrators doing 2 damage each is normally the death of this sort of infantry, but they reduce damage by 1 to a minimum 1, and they're 2 wounds each. So when you're shooting Disintegrators at them, you're actually having to wound them with 2 Disintegrators, and because they've got a 5-up feel no pain to ignore wounds, and they get reroll 1s when they're within range of the banner, they've almost got a 4+ feel no pain, and there's a stratagem you can make them a 4+, and at that point you're left going, well, I can't kill them. Yeah. It's actually more efficient to fire 1 damage weapons at them at that stage to negate that part of Bestial Vigor. But going from this is actually giving me 3 army builds I want to try. The first is mining laser spam, talking about the Jackal, and like I said earlier, running with a bunch of Goliaths and Ridge Runners and mining lasers, and setting up essentially a gigantic light show party. Yep. with minimal deep strike, stuff to claim backfield objectives, and maybe one hitting unit to drop in and cause some pain. I think that's a really interesting way of putting them on the table. It's certainly not something you'd expect from a cult.
Mm-hmm.
It also doesn't rely on blips and things.
Yeah.
So you can actually afford to play it more traditionally.
Except isn't that one of the things that makes Genestealer a cult?
Well, that was actually one of the biggest hurdles I found with the blips.
Oh.
Because you think, it'll be easy to put my units in range.
No, I wouldn't think it would be easy, but...
just getting the models, because you have to in your head... how do I explain it? So putting the Ridge Runners down, they're on a flying base. They're one of the big...
Yeah.
They're normally the bottom half of the flying stands for the flies. If you put 3 blips touching each other, so you can't actually deploy those 3 Ridge Runners.
Because
so
obviously...
you actually have to consider spacing on how those blips are placed.
Which then potentially gives away what you're going to put down.
So to deploy those 3 plus the Jackal, who is on an oval base as well, just to make it a bit more awkward, I was actually having to, while putting the blips down, actually deploy in my head to know roughly where everything was going. And then when I had extra blips from the stratagem, I was able to give myself 2 or 3 spots that unit could go.
Yeah.
Rather than, I suppose, if you've got 20 blips, obviously you can afford to be a bit more...
Scattergun?
Yeah. But I definitely felt like it only was something I noticed start of game 1 with Dave. I started putting blips down, and in my head was going, I'm actually going to struggle deploying them if I put that like that.
Yeah.
So, and because you only have to be within 1 inch of the center of the blip, for a single model, I probably could, but I certainly couldn't have put 3 Ridge Runners side by side.
Oh no,
that physically wouldn't have been possible. I might have if I'd made them into a Y shape, maybe. But it would have been a real pain. So it was just something that it didn't really become apparent to me until I actually had to deal with it on the table. And terrain impacts it as well.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's something that you may need to trial a few more times before you decide to stop using it.
I think for most armies you'll want to use it.
Yeah, it's just a different strategy. Like, it's a different way to use strategy and one that you're not used to.
Yeah.
So you have to get used to it, and I think once you've played a few more games, it'll become second nature, and you'll be able to think that through. And whereas obviously these are the first games you played, so you're learning as you're going.
The problem with the mining laser idea that I have, it requires you to string the units out to maximize her auras and buffs.
Yes.
Which you can't do with blips.
No, I know we've talked about it. So.
Yeah. So anyway, the second one I want to do, like I said, is a big aberrant bomb style army.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd only work at 2,000 points because the aberrants are so expensive. But it would essentially be what I've just described, the 30 aberrants and support characters required. And then everything else would go into essentially chaff and screening and screen clearance. So whether or not that was like 100 acolytes that, deployed on the table. Actually, if you're really sneaky...
You should see the look on his face. He's getting so excited.
Well, because there's a stratagem that lets you move 3 units from blip to deep strike, you'd actually deploy the 3 units of aberrants, which would then mean you could put all of your acolytes into deep strike, and then rip those 3, that's 700 points off the table. So whatever you had left obviously has to survive, which is a risk all of its own.
Yes.
But if you're going first, you can't be tabled. So you can afford to do exactly that and go, cool, now I'm going to dump 1,700 points of my army.
Yeah.
1,800 points of my army on your doorstep and charge you with it. And that has huge realms of appeal. It's a real high risk, high reward army, though, because if you don't go first, you have to have a plan B as to how that's going to work.
Or you die.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly.
Well, it just means a 3-hour game might be 2 hours and 30 at the pub.
Still good if it's game 4.
Yeah.
Of a 4-game day.
And the last one I want to try is it's probably the more balanced of it's very similar to the build I've got at the moment, but it's a much more balanced scenario. It drops the aberrants in favor of more acolytes. It adds it changes again. It has to up the points because it changes it to a brigade to give me a few more CP. It takes a Brood Surge from Vigilus, which gives you buffs to the Acolytes. It's almost a full rebuild because it ditches the Ridge Runners for starters. Because while I think if you're going Ridge Runners, it would work. Like if I'd ran 9 of them, I think that'd work really well because you can take 3 units of them, put 3 blips down, string them all out, get the buffs on all of them, and that makes chilling efficiency more effective because you're getting more bang for your buck. But 3 units of 3 is 760 points plus the Jackal, so you're talking 800 points worth of models that do die relatively rapidly. And in units of 3, it means that so when Richard was firing his Castellan at them, he was able to go, cool, I'm going to put the Volcano Lance at that one, the Plasma at that one, and then the missiles and the Siege Breaker Cannons at the third one. And he killed 3 of them. Whereas if I'd had a squad of 3 and he's gone the Volcano Cannon at that unit of 3, it's got D6 shots. He got 5 shots for the first salvo, 5 hits, 5 wounds. I potentially lose all 3 of them to the same single gun. So that changes that game completely, where Richard just tables me around turn 3.
Yeah.
So
we've got some thoughts there anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely an army that it reminds me when I first started playing my Drakari back in
whenever
it was before the 5th edition Codex, so it was probably early 5th or tail of 4th, somewhere in that space. And it took me a good 6 months of lots of games to actually get them to a point where I felt really confident with them.
Yeah.
And then the Codex came out and it took me another 6 months to adjust and find my feet with them. But then I got consistent with them. So I definitely think this is an army that I can make that happen with, but it's what that looks like, I'm not sure yet. Because the Drakari one was constantly evolving and changing, and as I got more and more games and was able to make more and more educated choices. And
having played 4 whole games with them now, is it an army that you want to keep playing with?
Yeah, I do. I really enjoyed playing them. It's a very strange game to play because particularly when I played Richard, especially, I'm looking at it going, okay, cool, I lost 250 points turn 1. 320 actually because he killed a truck as well. And then I dropped in 15, 20, it was 20 Acolytes? 20 Acolytes. Lost all of them in his turn 2, plus another truck. And I'm literally hiding at a line of sight going, I killed my first model in turn 3. And it was a sniper shot at a company commander from 36 inches away.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're going, oh my God, I've lost a third of my army. And this is not a good place to be. And then if you stack it right and get your charges off, then all of a sudden you swing the game in a turn. It's just a huge swing in a turn. And then the trick there is to make sure that you've actually got the staying power to last after you've swung the game. Because, and that's what I saw with Richard, is that the game swung turn 3, and at turn 5 I was still in a very commanding position. Yeah. And then turn 6 was, this is actually, hang on.
We're going to a not very good place now.
And then turn 7 was I'm tabled.
Yeah.
So it's going to require different thinking.
Yeah, I'm just watching the recording that we're doing starting to chunk a little bit. So I'm thinking, how about we wrap up this part now and then come back in a minute and give some final thoughts and say goodbye. Okay, so we're back to wrap up what is more than likely the longest episode we have ever recorded.
Yeah, it might not hit 3 hours, but it won't be far off. And it's been a bit of a ramble, to be perfectly honest, because it's it's been recorded over 2 different weeks with an event in the middle and, the
and
benefits of hindsight.
Army. Yeah. So I think before we do wrap up, the purpose of this was really to kind of share with people what the process is that goes in behind planning an army, and share how, how you think about it and putting it together. So obviously for more experienced players, they've kind of got that process down pat, but perhaps for some of the less experienced players, it might be useful.
Yeah, I suppose the thought process behind putting together any army for a tournament is going to change based on the missions and based on your own objectives and goals, and particularly with any sort of new army. I think if you're more familiar with an army, you know what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and you've got a bit more scope to not go through the process like I did, where having never played the army prior to the event, for the current codex at least, I had to make some assumptions and sort of second guess what I thought was going to happen and how it was going to work. And
well, that's true, but I still think that you have to do that anyway. Like, not many people can afford to go out and just buy one of everything just to play the different permutations and see how it works. I still think
that there's a mentality shift there, which is probably a whole other topic around.
We are not recording that today. Carry on.
Between a collector, which is what I think most people start out as, where you're buying the models that look cool, that you want to use on the table, that you think look, the just super cool and awesome, compared to someone who is building an army for a tournament.
Mm.
And when I started the hobby, I was definitely a collector. And for some of my armies, I still am a collector.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's a period through probably the mid 2000s where I've got a bunch of armies that were bang on 2,000 points for that period of time, all the way through to about 2010.
Mm.
And they're not collections. They were built as an army. And then the problem I have with those armies now is I can't really adapt them and update them because I can't match the colour schemes. Whereas with a collection, you tend to... like those Ridge Runners, I'd love to run 9. I'm never going to buy 9.
Mm.
But that won't stop me playing a couple of games with proxy models at home or at a mate's place to just see if there's any validity in doing it, so that I might wander down that road at some point in the future. Whereas if you're riding a tournament army, you're going to be more critical about what you're buying because you're working to a budget, both in points and in dollars.
Yeah, I guess the point I was trying to make was I really hope this has been useful and not just 3 hours of listening to us blather on. I hope there is we did it with a purpose. So it wasn't just recording 3 hours for the sake of, talking for 3 hours.
Look, it helped me work through some of the question marks I had around the army and let me then put the army on the table and come away with some more learning from it. So, I've got 1, maybe 2 more events that I can attend by the end of the year.
Mm.
So the goal at that point will be I think the next one's July. I think the next one is.
I have no idea.
It's being run by Mitch from Games Workshop Fremantle.
He hasn't supplied me any details to put it on to the calendar of events, so I don't know when that is at all.
Okay. Mitch. Yeah, so I've got that one, and then Crags will normally run a 40k one later in the year as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've got that in the calendar for the second half of the year either.
Everything that Crags has got scheduled is in the calendar.
Okay, I'll have a look. So I reckon I'll get 2 more, maybe a third if I can sneak into the Crags Champion final.
Mm.
And the goal will be to essentially use this army for the rest of the year and try and get more painting done to it as the year goes on after show.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's going to be an army that's sort of this year's project army, I suppose, around the other stuff I'm trying to get done.
Yeah, and with you saying that, you think that that's probably a episode for another day, just another thing that's popped into my head for an idea for an episode for another day, and I guess I'm flagging it so people can let us know whether or not they would actually think it's useful. We talk about the importance of players' packs, and I've been talking to some people from all over the world. They've been contacting me asking for some ideas, suggestions, help, etc. in writing their players' packs and across a number of different systems. And I thought it could be potentially useful to actually have an episode on that as well.
Fair enough.
So what are your thoughts on that? Anything?
Look, players' packs are always I actually had a conversation with a guy about a players' pack on one of the Facebook groups. And the players' pack, in my opinion, is one of the most important parts of the event because it sets expectations.
Mm-hmm.
It tells it should tell the players what the rules for the event are, not just on the table, but how all the pre-game stuff, all the post-game stuff, how the scoring's being done, how the prizes are being awarded. It should give them enough information that it is everything they need to know about the event in one spot. Mm-hmm. Now, it's obviously not going to include rule books and that sort of stuff.
No, but it tells you which rule books that apply.
Which rule books to use, yep. Download links to anything that's necessary. Mm-hmm. And it's something that, we spend a lot of time on these packs, and they're often 6 to 10 pages to get everything in there. Mm-hmm. But for me, that stuff's what tells the players what they're going to be dealing with. It's probably one of the most important parts of the event. So yeah.
Anyway, that's as we said, a thought for another day, but it just popped into my head, so it came out of my mouth.
You'd have to listen to this to remember it now.
Well, I could write it down somewhere.
You could do.
Yeah, probably won't though. I'll write it down on this notebook, but I'll lose the notebook.
Yeah. Anyway.
Any other thoughts before we wrap up for today?
No, look, it was. It's always nice when I get to go and play at a tournament rather than running it with you. Mm-hmm. It's a change of pace for me. So I had a good day out. I had 4 really nice opponents and, had a fun, casual day, basically.
Yeah.
The setup and pack-up went really well. It was awesome to see some of the bolt action forces out in force. And
I heard there was some amazing bolt action terrain there as well.
The terrain was really good. And the Kings of War guys, there was some wicked big dragon monsters and stuff that I got to see as well. So, but it was, it was nice to see the club that, at least from the South Branch's point of view, that I opened in 2002 with Bob Gray, going strong.
Yeah.
17 years later.
It has redefined itself and evolved and lots of things. And as you said before, it used to be the Skulls 40k event, and now it's become much more inclusive. So,
and the fact that 17 years on, like they had 120 players over the
2 days,
6 game systems that they ran over the 2 days, which is huge.
Yeah.
So it was really positive, and we were very thankful to be able to assist them in getting those extra tables for 40k, so they had more players again. So, congratulations to all of the team, the committee and all the TOs for Outpost 6030 for their work for Skulls Autumn. I'm looking forward to Skulls Spring. Oh, that's another one I can go to.
Yeah, we'll see about that. It gets closer. And Crags did run their Age of Sigmar event on Saturday of this weekend, just gone as well. I did put a call out asking if people would take photos because we were unable to go down there and check it out this weekend, but... Yeah, no, I haven't seen any photos either. We'll
have to see if we can find some and share them on the Facebook page. In the meantime, though, that's it for this episode. Yeah. We'll catch you in 2 weeks' time for the next one. Otherwise, you can catch us next Wednesday or every alternate Wednesday live on Facebook. Mm-hmm. We might be doing a few that'll trickle over onto Google Hangouts via YouTube to try and get some guests on in the next few lives. So we'll give you plenty of notice for that, though. Until then, though, I hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll see you at the next one of our events, which in this case will be Show 2019.
Yes.
Until then, though, take it easy.
Happy gaming, everyone.
You've been listening to the Objective Secured podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, you can visit our website, objectivesecured.com.au. You can find us on Facebook, Facebook/Objective Secured, or you can email us, obsec@optusnet.com.au. Thanks for listening.